As someone...
Too many.
As someone who has fed the dog once a week for 2 years, I'm not that attached to the dog.
It's probably dead
Right?
now.
Like,
That's not the point.
the dog's at dad's place and I live with mum. I'm not that attached to the dog.
I appreciate that, right? But you, okay. Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you not being so attached to the dog. That doesn't mean, right, that you dislike the dog.
I don't want the dog to die.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that if there was a golden retriever puppy who's going to go and catch the ball, I'd rather play with that. You want to hear an awesome combination of words that just popped into my head? Universes beyond Bionicle.
Oh.
I've been saying this.
Yeah,
bro.
he has.
I've been saying this. If I could have it, it'd be Bionicle. Universe beyond Bionicle.
Hey everyone, welcome back to From the Vault podcast, a podcast all about game store stuff from the perspective of a game store owner and a game store employee and massive fan, Trent.
Hello, everyone. I'm back. Welcome everyone to the Vault Games podcast.
And we've got Connor behind the scenes here.
I'm back and in Dolby Digital sound.
Yes, we gave him an actual mic this time.
He earned the mic this time.
He did.
We didn't just give it to him. He took it.
He killed one of us for it.
Never to be seen again.
And we are joined today by Lachie.
Hello.
Community member. You've probably seen him on Vault Store streaming on the Vault Twitch channel in the last 2 years.
But more importantly,
you have podcasts and streaming now for
I've
Wrestle
got
Radio.
Wrestle Radio Australia, yeah. We're almost celebrating our 10-year anniversary of Wrestle Radio Australia, Australia's longest-running pro wrestling podcast. So for anyone who's interested in that kind of stuff, on November 11th, we're going to be doing a 10-hour live stream to celebrate that birthday. And I also podcast about board games too. I've got a podcast called Board of Game. That's Board of Games, B-O-A-R-D of Games. You can catch that on Twitch or follow us on Facebook or whatever, and you'll get those podcasts.
I watch your Board of Games. I really like that one, actually.
Thank you. I appreciate
And
it.
there will be links to all that down in the description.
Shout out to Jeff Setti.
Yeah, that's the way, buddy.
I don't know who Jeff said.
You don't watch the podcast.
You don't watch the pod?
Yeah, I don't.
Wow, what a guy.
Wow.
Oh,
Jeff is Jeff Setti.
Jeff Setti. Okay.
The Jeff himself.
Yeah.
That's his
Not-
last
sorry.
name.
Not from
we've
Craig
actually
Ferguson,
already
Jeff.
been talking for about 45 minutes.
Hey,
I've
Silver Curtain.
nearly finished my drink.
The Iron Curtain, bro. We're not supposed to tell them.
Oh, sorry.
I tell you what, this is wild considering it's the first time I've been on this podcast.
Absolutely. First time.
Definitely no lost
Absolutely.
media here.
Definitely was not on a previous recording where the audio file was completely corrupted.
Can we cut? Do you still have the audio? Can we cut to the audio?
Yeah,
For
we'll
just
cut to
now?
the audio.
Yeah.
This is what we recovered from the audio of the last stream. So yeah,
And we did that podcast for how many hours?
That was like 3.5 hours.
3.5. Yeah, that was great.
At least, look, it only recovered 24 minutes. So I guess we have to record. Again.
Allegedly did a podcast.
No.
Oh,
It's
no.
almost like
Oh,
we really
how-
love this guy. I love having him on the podcast.
How horrible.
How horrible.
And speaking of the podcast, obviously, that we're on, and what we want to talk about today, what are we talking about today, Dylan?
I believe today we are talking about types of gamers.
Correct. We want to get into the archetypes, I think is the best word for it, of gamers in board games, hobby games like miniatures games, and importantly, Magic the Gathering and other card games, right?
Yeah.
Because in games that are card games, you have very kind of specified archetypes of players. But, when you get to like board games and miniatures games, it doesn't kind of fit the same vibe, does it? It's not the same. I like to say that there are 4 types of gamers in general, right? And obviously there's some argument to be made, but I think there's casual, competitive, hyper casual, and hyper competitive. And I think you always fit into one of those 4. Whether there's like some overlap or whether you flip and flop on some days or what game you're playing, I think you always fit into one of those 4 when you're playing a game. And I think that the interesting point, and where I really wanted Lachlan on the show today, is because Lachlan has some really interesting and very divisive points on...
Nice choice of words there, Trent. Yeah, interesting and divisive.
Truly, no, I don't want to sound facetious. I'm not absolutely genuine. I think it's very interesting the way I've watched you kind of interact with Commander as a game mode in Magic the Gathering, but also as somebody who plays a lot of board games yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you've dipped your toes in miniatures games too, but again, mostly board games, I would say.
Yeah.
A bit of Commander, tiny bit of miniatures games.
And also other trading card games, right?
Sorry, that's
Oh,
so
yeah.
important. My apologies. I should say
Like
that.
Flesh
Yeah.
and Blood and stuff.
Yeah. Played a lot of Flesh and Blood.
Netrunner. You played a lot of Netrunner,
Played a lot of
right? Back in the
Netrunner.
day. What else did you play?
I played a lot of Duel Masters when that was a going concern.
Bays.
Oh my God.
Yeah, because that was a good card game, believe it or not.
Double Shield Breaker.
Yeah, like I basically, if a trading card game comes out and I can get my hands on it, I'll play it. Like I played a bunch of Keyforge, I've played a bunch of Pokemon.
I'd love Keyforge. Huge Keyforge.
Yeah, and you know, I'm desperate to get my hands on Lorcana.
Isn't
I
everyone?
know.
You know what?
Topical.
Everyone outside of you know what? Everyone inside of US and Canada as well, one of the few regions that have Lorcana, are desperate to get their hands on Lorcana.
See, but the difference for me is I want to play it. So that's controversial take.
Yeah, that's a very heavy take.
That's bold.
Number one.
That's bold.
But yeah, so I just basically, if I can get my hands on a game, I will play it because I've also played like tons of RPGs and like weird RPGs are one of my favorite genres. So, and especially with RPGs, kind of defining what you want out of the play experience, that idea of a rule zero conversation is so ingrained in the space. Whereas I feel like a lot of the time with board games, you're kind of expected to know what the expectations are for that
Well,
game.
I think in board games, right, the game itself sets the expectation
Yes.
more often than not,
Yeah.
right? Like I think we talked about this actually on the podcast, didn't quite make it, but we talked about like kind of the games we would get people involved with if we were teaching them. And we talked about Catan was one that came up and had this very interesting kind of response that we saw, especially from you, Pear, where it's like Catan sets an expectation on how you need to be playing it, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't fit that expectation, you're probably gonna have like quite a rough time playing Catan,
Yeah.
I think, right? And in a very less enjoyable space. And I think that there are lots of games in the board game space that set that expectation. And I like to talk about that as well and talk about, you just said something interesting to me, right? And this comes back to this archetype of player where you said a rule zero when discussing something about Dungeons and Dragons or any role-playing game, right? Well, that's not a D&D thing, rule zero, right? That's like a magic
That's
discussion
terminology from Magic
from
the
Magic
Gathering.
Gathering, right?
I think
Or more
it's
importantly,
session 0 is really the RPG session.
exactly,
The RPG thing for that.
exactly. There's this idea of zero, which is like this expectation setting happens before any game elements are introduced. What do we want from this experience, right? And I think that in Magic having its rule zero, right, all that terminology we're using isn't even really what rule zero is, right? So for those at home, the rule zero, right, of Magic the Gathering, and more importantly, Commander, this is actually a thing that came from Commander, which is that all of the rules introduced to the Commander format by the rules committee, this is the true rule zero, right, are there as a like a reference. They're there as like a framework, okay? And if you and your group want to omit these rules, introduce your own rules, whatever you want to do with these rules here that we've introduced to this format, you may, as long as everyone agrees and everyone has a good time. That's what the rule zero is. That's like me saying, for example, a card like Grizzlebrand might be banned in Commander because it's very, very powerful. And if people were just allowed to play it left, right, and center, it would see so much play. It would very much homogenize, is a good word for it, the format. However, if I'm playing a Liliana deck and I'm playing Liliana and her 4 demons she had contracts with before Nicol Bolas took the contract, it's a very Vorthosy deck, we'll talk about it in a second, and I love that story, and I'm not abusing Grizzlebrand, and I set my own precedent, like maybe I'll activate him once per turn, or I won't reanimate him, I'll hard cast him. Funny word there. I think that that's where this rule zero comes in, and your group can say, well, that's okay. Because the ban isn't for that. The ban is because of how powerful he could be when someone just goes, Entomb, reanimate, draw 28 to 35 cards. That's where that rule exists and why it exists, right? Because they would win the game on the spot with a bunch of rocks. And that sucks because everyone would do it. So that's what the rule zero truly is. But I got to the point, that very last part, where I said, as long as everyone agrees and everyone has a good time. That's what people have taken from this rule zero and turned into this session zero for Commander, where the rule zero discussion isn't really about what rules we're breaking for the fun of the game, in the sense of how people tend to use it, especially in like an open format, like a tournament setting or whatever. It's more like, what do I bring to the table of Commander? What do I want from the game of Commander? And why do I play Commander over other games? Why did I come all the way to this store or this event or wherever we're at? Why did I go out of my way to build this deck and spend the money and spend the time? And that could be things like proxies, whatever. Why do I do this? And that's what that rule zero has become about, which is what the session zero tends to be about when you talk about things like Dungeons and Dragons or any role-playing game, where the dungeon master will say, or the game master will say, hey, this is the setting. This is the kind of game we're playing. Anything from like, your characters may die, or I don't want to kill characters. Everything from like, there'll be a lot of combat, to this will be political intrigue, like, you know, Star Wars Episode 2. You know what I mean? It's like, that's kind of what that session zero becomes. And I think it's interesting that you use that rule 0 point.
And I really like the phrase rule 0 specifically for this, right? Because I feel like the term session 0 gets used because it's literally the stuff that comes before session 1.
Yeah.
Right? That's where that term originates from.
Yes.
We're not playing the game yet. We're introducing all these ideas. Whereas the phrasing of rule 0 is there with the idea that this is a rule that supersedes all other rules.
Yeah.
Before we get into the actual rules of the game, the thing that's more important than all those other rules is this is a framework for you to have fun. So make sure the people around you are having fun.
Yes, and if these rules in the context of Commander aren't facilitating that, errata them, change them, do whatever you want to do, because it's all about having fun. And that's where I think as well with like, for example, we play a Star Wars D20 system, and we use the Force Point system from Genesis.
Yes.
That's our kind of rule 0, where it's like, we just love the Force Point system. It's so engaging and fun, and we want to use it. It
allows
exist.
a lot more back and forth in the game from both the DM perspective and player perspective.
And also like this cool, almost like antagonistic kind of snipping back and forth of like, well, you know, I want to reroll because we'll get this thing right, but then Dylan, I'm like, I don't want to give the thing to Dylan because he's going to spend 2 for a free action. And then he does, and he kind of gives you that look as the DM where he's like, you did this, and you're like, well, I can't blame anyone else but myself. And there's also like that idea of, I mean, I love this rule. There's also that idea where it's like, you know, everyone at the table, most of the time, one person in the 4 or 5 players are going to use that dice. So now you got to go like, but if I use this resource, somebody else has denied the resource. And everyone has to kind of agree, again, people having fun. Everyone agrees, no, for example, Trent in this situation, no, Trent, you should use that reroll. You need it right now. And then it's like, oh, but then later on, like I said, Dylan's going to use it. It's a great system.
Yeah.
But most importantly, coming back to the point, it is just something we've introduced. And we did that as a session 0, as like a rule 0, which I do think is great. And that's what supersedes it all, right?
And I think session 0 in RPGs is especially important because a lot of those games are about relationships and how you interact with other people. So I'll reference quite an obscure one here. This is a game from Brisbane called A Divorce of Druids, which was published as a series of zines. Right?
Is this one, Jason?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? Super interesting game. It's a 2-player only RPG where you get a zine that is a bunch of land that you and your druidic life partner shared and had domain over. But you two are getting a divorce. And like, you don't hate each other, but you're getting a divorce, right? Because this is what happens. And now you have to divvy up by physically using a pair of scissors with the zine to cut up and share the pieces of the land that you now each own. So when you're getting into playing characters who are getting divorced, and it's a 2-player game, and that's the entirety of the game.
Like not including a DM, including a DM. Like as in,
There is no DM.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
As in, like there's no third party here.
Exactly.
It's just
It's you and me sitting across a table, and we're going to pretend to be getting divorced, and it might get heated, right? So there needs to be this time before the game starts where we go, hey, let's remember that we like each other. You know what I mean?
This is interesting too, right? Because I think this applies to any of these kind of, especially those 1v1 games where the role-playing element exists. Like, I think that's kind of true of a board game called Fog of Love, right? Like,
I love Fog of Love.
I love Fog of Love too, but I think Fog of Love is another game where you kind of want to get into the character you're playing. You kind of have a bit of fun with it. But, you know, especially if you're playing with your partner and such, you know, you might have reactions that are, as the doctor character or whatever you're playing, that aren't real. And then you don't want to ever be like, oh, I really dislike this thing as this, you know, privileged white doctor character, but I don't care about it as a human being, right? So you want to have that kind of almost that a session 0 again is a weird way of putting it. It's more like a rule 0 where you go, don't worry, by the way, I'm just roleplay. Like all this is just silly. Like, I don't mean, if I say something mean as a doctor man or whatever, I don't mean it. Like I'm not going to slur at you or anything, but I'm saying like, you know, so I think that also does apply in the context of some board games, whereas, you know, a lot will just set that expectation.
Well, I mean, I think that kind of sets it into anything that involves role playing. You should really have that session 0 or rule 0 discussion with whoever you're across the table from, because that is important. Like you said, Fog of Love is the most fun when both of you are on the same page about it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Like Josh and I playing it on stream like 2 years ago, we both went in there going, this is going to be the dumbest shit ever. Let's have some fun. And in the end, I ended up seeing my heart will go on to him. So, like...
Do you remember Damien and I's game that we played as well? I think I was on stream too.
I do not remember
Yeah,
that
Damien and I played the game together. We had a great time. But we had the conversation first, because also the thing was Damien and I didn't know each other very well.
Yeah.
So we didn't know we didn't have any expectations to set in the first place. We both sat down first and went, okay, what's this game? We kind of read the rules and I was like, oh, I see. So it's very roleplay heavy. Let's get right into it. And he had a couple of laughs, I did too. And we even had like conversation first about the game, then kicked off the stream and started playing it together.
But to put the tiger on the table and yell at it for a little bit, we kind of had a rule 0 conversation about this podcast, right? Which was, specifically Trent and I came into this going, we're going to have different opinions on stuff and we're going to challenge each other because that's part of what makes this conversation interesting. Right?
And exactly. And like I said to you, if for any reason I'm challenging you and it is getting heated, this isn't because I want to put you on blast. This isn't because I feel that I directly disagree with you or anything like that. I just want to voice these kind of controversial opinions because it helps a lot and it kind of pulls out your intention of what you're saying too. Because I think as well, it's very easy to say one thing and let the room pull their intention from that and pull what you're trying to say, read between the lines. It's better to get more comprehension by going, well, let's poke the little details.
And that's exactly what it comes down to when we're talking about Rule Zero. Like, especially let's refocus on Commander here, right?
Good idea.
So when you're talking about Rule Zero in Commander, it's what do we want this kind of game to be? What do we find enjoyable? How are we going to create a table? Because it's a casual format.
Yeah.
Above all, it is a designed to be a casual format.
A social format as well.
Social
right? That's very
format.
important.
So how do we create a space at this table where everyone's going to have fun playing this game that can be played in so many different ways? Like a stupid number of different ways.
Not to mention that fun is also extremely subjective.
Yes.
Because it's being played by so many different types of people, especially Commander. And maybe, and I'm not going to pull away from this because I like the Commander conversation, we'll stick with this for a while, but maybe there's a way that we look at things where Commander is at its core kind of a role-playing game. At its core. It's not got the same details. It's not so front-facing with it, right? Like I'm not playing a paladin who I'm putting my character in a whole different set of shoes. It's more like, I want this thing to happen and my goals coincide with this thing. And the want of it is not related to, I have to win this for prize. I want to be the best or whatever. This want could be any number of things and I'm trying to get there while also taking steps that enjoy the people. The three other players usually at my table are also having fun.
That's a very interesting way to look at Commander, like as a role-playing game, and now it's suddenly like all clicked in for me. Like even from my personal perspective, right? We've got my Grand Arbiter Augustine the Fourth deck. It's a blue-white deck that's full of petitioners. I know you love playing against it.
Oh, it's so good, man. We love that deck here.
It's so amazing. But the thing is that deck is built, and my role, the deck is built, from my perspective, it's built because one, my goal in playing that game is to mill out my opponents, is to put cards from their deck into their discard pile so that when they go to draw, they have no cards and they lose the game. So like that's almost like my class is, if to compare it to D&D, my class is the mill, but then my character sheet is the 26 persistent petitioners and the thrumming stone that lets me keep pulling them out. Like it's almost like that.
But all the tribal pieces help synergize.
Yeah, that's your character build pretty much. And then, not to mention that then there's also suboptimal choices that play around with the fact that I'm going to make everything an advisor here. So then I'm doing this little role play thing of, well, we're all just politicians talking at the table, wasting everyone's time. So like I can see that now, and it's actually a really interesting way to look at Commander.
You jumped on a word there that I was actually about to use, which is suboptimal choices, or a phrase, suboptimal choices, as kind of what makes something a role-playing choice to me is when you start doing things not because they are the best option for you moving forward, but because they are the thing that makes sense with what you are trying to do as a character or as an entity within the game. So taking this away from tabletop for a second, currently playing Marvel Spider-Man 2. Just come out, been playing a ton of it, right? Really enjoying the game. No surprise, I enjoyed the other Spider-Man games. I was going to like this.
It's AAA.
It's AAA. And if you've seen the trailers, if you haven't seen any trailers, if you're avoiding everything, mild spoiler alert here, right? The game has Venom in it.
Oh shit, really? Yeah,
Whoa! Right? And so...
Spoiler warning.
Brah. There's a section of the game where you play as Peter Parker with the Venom symbiote on and you're wearing the black suit and you are more powerful, but the character within the game also becomes more aggressive and it heightens the dark emotions. And it's an open world game where there's all these crimes going on, all these different activities you can do. And I made the choice of, and it wasn't 100% like a choice that I made, but as I was playing, whenever there were options of things to do, I was like, well, this is what Peter's doing right now. So normally when I play Spider-Man, if there's a crime going on in the city, I divert my attention to go deal with that crime before I continue on my critical path or whatever I'm doing. When I had the black suit on, I ignored crimes. The main story was pulling me forward. Peter was focused on doing that. Crime's going to happen. I need to go do this next thing. right? Which I think really enhanced the game for me, because then when I was no longer in the symbiote suit and a crime popped up and I went, I'm Peter Parker, I've got to go help the people of New York, it felt important.
Yeah.
And I think that element of role-playing is really what makes games come to life. So like you're saying with your petitioners deck, it's not the winning the game because of your petitioners that makes that deck do what it does. It's the slowing the game down with bureaucracy because you've got a deck full of petitioners.
Yeah.
That's what makes it that deck. That's what makes it the petitioners deck, is that it's about bureaucracy and having a bunch of these different characters on the table who all do the same thing within your little world.
And it's kind of like a waste their time 2023 kind of vibe, where it's kind of all about like you take a lot of game actions and you also slow down your opponents to stop them from taking as many game actions as they could. But again, you're also not necessarily like comboing out and winning quickly. So you're not presenting like an immediate threat. You're just kind of being annoying, which can translate to you being removed from the table pretty quickly, but it doesn't really translate to you being like, it doesn't make the game stressful. Because it's not like, oh, I can't play any cards and Dylan's setting up these combo pieces that are going to win randomly. It's, I can't really do much, but Dylan's kind of got like 5 dudes and they're like 1/3s.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Dylan's got 5 dudes, 1/3s, and I can play one thing.
Yeah, and I'll just play
I'll play the most impactful thing I have in my hand, and that's it.
I want to say something as well. This is like, because we talked about this, unfortunately, in the podcast didn't make it, but we talked about like learning games, and I mentioned that I tend to like losing games. It's a big thing that I really enjoy in a game. I like being challenged. Is the point I make the most.
Different.
Because I'm built different. Just simply built different. I like to be really challenged in a game. And I think that one of the things that kind of helped me kind of warp my opinion around Commander as a game especially, and kind of helped me learn about this whole taking suboptimal lines of play and how valid that is, was that I would get not visibly or like directly angry or frustrated, but I would get somewhat frustrated if my opponent wasn't making very optimal plays. If my opponent was just like doing nothing and just like not impacting the game very much, I'd kind of go to this player, not like verbally or like open conversation, but I think about it and go like, oh, you know, this person could really apply more. This person's deck could be better, or they could be playing these cards differently. Like they do the wrong order of cards, and they go, okay, pass the turn. I'm like, oh, but if you ordered better, you could have removed my commander, had to cast it next turn, to be like whatever. But you know, I wouldn't be winning this next turn. But now I'm going to win this next turn because this one player didn't do the thing correctly. And I wouldn't get like angry at them or blame them or anything like that. But I would get like frustrated. I'm like, oh, well, you know. And eventually, I thought to myself, like, you know, you got to get past that. You got to get past the whole people can play the game differently. There are different types of players. We're going to get to that in a second. But they're going to be doing, that's going to happen anyway. You can't control how people play, right? So if you win and it's because somebody made some suboptimal play or some like wrong play, that's fine. Pack it up, roll it up, go next. If I lose to some player on my left because the player on my right could have counterspelled it, but they counterspelled my 6-drop red enchantment, you got to get past it. That's the game. But I actually flipped that on its head and realized that also applies to you. This is the thing a lot of people don't really think about, I think, when it comes to the kind of Spike or Johnny mentalities, which is, hang on, but if you can go, okay, whatever, people are going to make mistakes, that's fine, then you're also allowed to not make this optimal play. You're also allowed, and if the game isn't ruined by this, it's not going to be ruined if you don't do it. If you have the win in your hand and you think that the game's a little bit like not interactive and hasn't really popped off yet and people haven't really done their thing, you can just not win the game. And that's not optimal, right? But that's totally valid. And if it made the game a better experience for people, if people got to do more of their cool stuff, people got to do more of their cool stuff. There's an important layer where that's not correct to say that, I didn't play my win condition and then Dylan wins and I'm like, oh yeah, but you know, I did have it 3 turns ago, so I chose not to do it. Like that's really turning it on its head and going, this is a really douchey, nasty thing to do. I think that's the worst case scenario of that situation where it's like, you then explain to the players that it was redundant and their win was completely eradicated because you could have done it. You let them do it. It was actually your choice. So you've won the game in your head and then you've moved on. That's not what this is about. It's just more about the idea of like, from the Silver Curtain dynamic, you know, you haven't showed them that you could have won. From their perspective, you couldn't have won and then they were able to, which is big. I think that also does a lot for the game. I'm not saying you shouldn't win games or that's a vendetta or like that's, sorry, not a vendetta. That's like a bad thing or like some kind of problem. But that helped me kind of, I think, rethink that idea and kind of reframe the concept of what is winning in a game. Because then I would not win a game and they would win a game. But then, you know, my partner or my friend did the cool thing and won the game, which is also its own win, right? Which I think a lot of people don't look at as well when they look at these games too, because they're in games, okay, this is a great example of role-playing games. We talk about these discussions is that there's no real win in Dungeons & Dragons or any role-playing game. There's no winning. The winning only happens when everyone has a good game. How does that not... Just because Magic has a win state, has an end game, it doesn't mean that Magic can't be the same. In fact, I would argue that Magic has to be the same in order to operate. I think Commander is designed, and it's not controversial for me to say.
Otherwise, no one would play it.
Exactly. And it's not controversial for me to say that Commander specifically... Now, this is... We'll get to a discussion about no one playing Magic as well, but in Commander specifically, I think it thrives from that existing. I think Magic as a game, like Standard, Legacy, Modern, whatever, I think that actually thrives as the win state matters.
Yes.
I think that thrives from like, no, we're here, we're battle wizards, I'm going to destroy you with my intellectual, look at that, might, and the efficiency and reliability of my deck building skills. That's huge for the game, and that's really built the game up to what it is today. But Commander specifically, definitely is a swing off the seat of its pants with everyone just has to have a good time.
Can we take this to a concrete example? So this is a game that I was playing with Trent a couple of weeks ago now, and I don't play a lot of Commander, and that's just by value of I do multiple podcasts and have a full-time job, and I like playing a lot of different games. So Commander I think of as one of the games I play, and I play hundreds of games, right? So I was playing a game of Commander, and I tend to play really big, explosive, stompy stuff. And I was playing a borrowed deck, and I played out almost my entire hand. And Trent pointed out to me, hey, Lachie, if you take some of that back, if you hold on to half of it, you're still large and in charge on board state. But then if a board wipe hits, you've got a chance to recover and play that second half of the hand and still be in charge of the board state without having so much of the risk on the table. And my response to Trent was, yeah, but I don't want to do that because that's not fun to me, right? My kind of win state of a game of Commander isn't, everyone else was on 0 life or everyone else was milled out and I still had life in the deck, so I win. That's not my goal for playing a game of Commander. My goal of playing a game of Commander is at the end, I get to say, hey, did you check out that 120 creature that I just swung with? Right? To me, that's a win. To me, playing out my whole hand means I am playing the most Magic the Gathering that I can play.
And this is the point that we had discussion on, which is like, what is the most Magic the Gathering you can play? Because while holding on to half of your cards and holding on to the other half, this is still playing the same amount of Magic overall, right? Let's say you play half your hand, you then play let's be more accurate. In this game, he didn't play half of his hand, he played half of his deck. He emptied his hand.
That's correct.
He played half his deck, and I was like, all right, you could play the rest of your whole deck right now. It was a Goreclaw deck, lots of draw power, lots of untapping lands, Gaia's Cradle, the works, right? Mm-hmm. Very powerful deck. And Lachie seemed to enjoy it when he was playing it. But he got to that kind of magnum opus, and I'm like, I can see now that you're going to make like 50 more mana and draw 50 more cards and play the rest of your deck, right? And if you had done half of it and half of it later, you would have played the same amount of cards. However, you wanted to commit to it now because this is like, let's just do it all now. I can do it now. I want to do it now. This is explosive and fun. But then there's the layer where I'm like, okay, but let's take 2 things into consideration, or maybe 3 things. The first one being that board wipe discussion where I'm like, yes, but you put a stress on the game because you may not be able to win on that turn, right? The deck doesn't play Concordant Crossroads because it's not trying to combo out and then win the game. That would be like a combo win.
Concordant Crossroads, by the way, for anyone watching that doesn't play Magic, is all creatures have haste.
Yeah, so it lets you attack with all those creatures you made, and his creatures would have had like so much power and toughness that he would have killed easily 12 players, let alone 3.
Yeah.
But, you're putting a lot of stress on the table saying, interact with Lachlan or the game is now over, right? Because they have to interact with this huge board state. When you don't do that much, you can't kill everyone, and all of a sudden you go, okay, well, now that I'm not imposing such a board state, I'm not putting the stress on people. That's the first layer. The second layer being that how much of the game are you exhuming from playing out a turn that could have taken 15 minutes to a turn that took you 45 minutes of gameplay and then still asked for the response from players, still gave them the trickling of a turn left where they got to play their own, maybe together, 40 minutes of turn if we're lucky. There's still less combined 3 than what you spent to get there. So between the exhuming of all the time that we spent, the stress of having to respond to it or losing, and then, of course, the convolution, right, with the deck that you're borrowing and going, am I starting to make mistakes, which are then making this harder and harder to track, both for myself and my opponents. And when my opponents go to me, what are the important pieces of my board? All of a sudden, I look down, kind of realize I've it's like Babel's Tower. I've kind of dug too deep. And I go, everything? Because I don't actually know what the real threats are on the table, right? Well, you might. I'm not trying to take that away from either and say that you don't know.
And I'll say that I didn't know. It wasn't my deck.
Exactly. So there are layers and layers that are deeper than simply, this is the most efficient and optimal thing. And that's also true. On top of all of that, it is also more optimal to go, let's pull the brakes, because if somebody plays farewell Lachie, right? So it is.
And I don't mean to jump over you there, but part of what I like about and the point you made about the amount of time consumed, I'll absolutely agree with you, right? There comes a point where I've got to go, how much is it worth me continuing to do this for the other 3 people sitting around the table whose time I'm also taking?
Like, you don't want somebody with their phone out, for example.
Exactly. But the idea of me being able to play out 99% of my deck and then someone else plays farewell, to me, that appeals. If I was that player, I would feel really good about that. So I like the idea of giving that player the opportunity to do something that, I guess, explosive, where it would be the same situation whether I had played out 50% of my deck or 99% of my deck. But it feels bigger to play it when the other player has played 99% of their deck. And to me, that's more exciting, that's more enjoyable.
I agree. But let's say that from the exciting, enjoyable perspective, right? Like playing a card like Farewell isn't a outmaneuver or an outclass or an out. Like I'm not one-upping you by that. Like I might just have the card versus not have the card, right? I might not have the card and draw it, and that's the kind of a serotonin hit of like, yes, I hit the answer, die. Like that could be very cool. But there's a lot of situations where I might just have the card from the beginning and go, okay, are you finally done? Cool, none of that mattered. Or I might just not get the card and go, well, nothing I do matters because Lachlan's going to kill me anyway.
Here's where we start opening the box of Lachlan's wild opinions on Commander, right? If I wanted to play a game where I could be outmaneuvered, I wouldn't be playing Commander. I feel like there are so many games where if I wanted the winner to be the winner because of their skill in play, Magic is in the second half of the list.
Well, Commander, I would assume.
Commander specifically,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because in constructed formats, there is more skill that goes into deck building so that you can have consistency and blah, blah, blah.
Even playing, like understanding the lines that your opponent may have.
Exactly.
Counting the cards that they've already used compared to like the list like they could be running, but comparing like if they're playing the Rakdos Scam as a deck example, they might have 4 Furies. So if they've used 3 of them, you're expecting the next one to come up. If the deck plays 3 Furies, you're done.
But even then, we're talking about a game with a huge amount of variability and having to keep in mind a huge amount of decision space in order to be able to predict what opponents... I tend to feel like outmaneuvering requires prediction, right? That's one of my understandings of that terminology. So if I wanted to play a game where I feel like I could lose by being outmaneuvered by my opponent, I would much rather play Android Netrunner as a collectible card game. Because when I lose Android Netrunner, I feel like I lost because the opponent outmaneuvered me, not because they had something in hand. Because in Android Netrunner, you can never lose by the opponent just having something in hand at the right moment, unless you took a huge risk, which allows them to have the thing in hand.
But if I take a step back right now, isn't that the situation you're in? You decided to take a big risk because you didn't mind if they had the card in hand. But if you hadn't have taken the big risk, the card in their hand wouldn't have stopped you. You still would have... Like that seems like, without saying that is the same thing, it's kind of parallel.
But the conversation we're having is that's one card out of the 99 card deck.
But
right?
it's not. It's 3 or 4 cards out of the 99 deck, right? Like I could play, in the example,
Sure.
Mickey was in the game, they were playing a black-white deck, Liesa. They could play Farewell. They could also play a card called Merciless Eviction, which reads in the situation a lot like Farewell. They could play, a blue player could play Evacuation, a blue player could play Cyclonic Rift.
Well, you should always assume that a blue player is playing Cyclonic Rift.
Well, yeah, even outside of deck building, right? Just the idea that you should always assume that there is redundancy in the game. Because here's the thing, right? A game like Commander, a game like Magic, eternally has like 28,000 cards. There's no universe. In fact, 0% chance in any game that would have 28,000 cards, there wouldn't be a ton of overlap. There's an absolute massive ton of overlap, right? So the odds of them having those cards are higher, okay? But then I also think to take a step back as well to that logic.
I want to pause and respond to something that you guys have just said there.
Okay.
Right? And this is from the fact that I play a lot of games. I enjoy Magic, but Magic and Commander are not my game of choice, right? And the way you guys talk about Magic is totally different to the way that I talk about Magic.
Yeah.
And as a result, the way I think about it in play.
Of course.
Yes.
right? I know the name Psychrift and I can picture the art. I don't know what Psychrift does.
That's okay. But if I say to you, a board wipe.
Sure, but then we're coming to the point where, for me as a player, I don't... Running joke, I say for me a lot on podcasts, have a drink every time I do. But if I'm playing this game and I want to know what the odds of my opponent having a board wipe are, you guys are able to do that. You go, okay, that player has blue and black. These are the possible board wipes they can play with the mana open. What's the odds of those being in their deck, right? I go into that game going, if they can afford a board wipe, they can afford a board wipe. If they can't, they can't. I don't know what the odds of that are.
Sure, but let's...
Because I don't know what Psychrift costs.
I agree.
I don't know what... I mean, I know what color Psychrift's in. But you mentioned Farewell, right? If that hadn't been part of this conversation, I'm intuiting that it's blue. I don't know that for sure.
No, it's white even.
There you go.
So here's the thing, right? Here's the thing. So let's strip back from what Dylan and I even said, right? And let's just say that there is 1 in 99 chance. Let's say there aren't any other examples,
Sure.
and it's just Farewell, right? Then, and going back to this point you made earlier, where you as a player would really enjoy the fact that you had that 1 in 99 card and you dealt with that person who played their
And
their
I, as a
entire board.
player, enjoy being beaten by laying my whole hand out, and then my opponent goes, but I've got the silver bullet that takes you out. To me, that's an exciting thing that happened in the game.
I agree. And I think that also comes back to this idea of like, how much information on the game do you have? Because I think that silver bullet analogy or metaphor is interesting because that's like Russian roulette. That's like 1 bullet in the chamber. But from Dylan and I's perspective, all 6 bullets are lined. Like all 6 bullets in the chamber have a bullet in them and they're all pointed at you. And the idea is, if you present a reason for me to shoot you, I will. So from that perspective, it goes, well, I've learned, and this comes by experience, right? So I've learned that by sandbagging, which is a term we talk about in a lot of games, where it's kind of holding some of your resources, even though you could continue to move forward, and kind of presenting not as much of a threat, that gun can be aimed at somebody else. And in a 1v1 environment, right? The gun is always loaded and it's always aimed at you. And then you have a gun that's loaded that's aimed at them. So you can't play that game. But in Commander, somebody could unload all 6 bullets into the other 2 players before it gets to your turn. And now the gun is empty, right? And there's a chance there's some loose like 7th chamber you couldn't see from your angle. But very rare, like Fierce Guardianship, as like for those who play Magic.
They've actually got a Glock.
Like, yeah, they've got like...
A
they've got the
physical gun in their pocket.
The
Yeah.
ankle gun, right?
Yeah.
They have like the ankle gun, the 1 bullet.
Little 2-shot Derringer in their purse.
What's the golden gun from 007 and 64? Anyway, it's like, that option, right? So that always exists, but you can pretty
And
well
then someone
rely that-
plays the instant from their hand that says they were odd job the whole time. It's cool.
Yeah, exactly, right? And they're only playing odd job no matter what you say. I don't care. It's my N64. You're at my house and mum's making the pizza rolls.
I equip Razor Hat.
Exactly. So, hey, it's not too far away. So anyway.
Universes be Bond.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
So, back to the point at hand. I think it's quite interesting. Yeah, I think that the important point to make here, and this comes back to this archetype of play, which is experience is so important, I think. And the more experience you have with the game, the more warped you become to like what is or isn't fun. And I want to switch to a conversation to something like Warhammer for a quick second. We're going to segue now.
Yep.
So here's a really controversial take, okay? I think, that I have in Warhammer. Maybe you agree with me in the comments. Shout out in the comments if you don't agree with this. The casual player and the hyper-casual player, more important to Warhammer, is the most toxic element of the game.
Wow, that's a take.
That's a take. Is the most toxic element of the game. Because a lot of the rhetoric for Warhammer 40,000 and for other Warhammer titles, or this comes to a lot of miniatures games, but mostly shows up in Warhammer 40,000 is from my perspective and what I've researched. A lot of the rhetoric and a lot of the loud rhetoric comes from that perspective. It comes from the perspective of, I just want to play a beer and pretzels game, want to get out some models, push them forward with my friends and roll some dice at each other, right? However, the game, much like Commander, is incredibly convoluted, has a ton of moving parts, and needs to, in the case of Magic 2, be balanced around it, because this isn't necessarily even true if the game itself feels super one-sided and unenjoyable. That perspective of, well, I just want to push models forward, I don't care what happens, actually doesn't hold as much water when your opponent brings a gun line of Imperial Guard units, or Astra Militarum nowadays, and shoots you over every wall and just rolls dice at you because that's their opinion of casual and fun, and you just can't really play the game and you're not enjoying it. that's an easy response to have, and that's totally valid. However, when you then go, online and say, well, you shouldn't be, constantly patching these things. You shouldn't be constantly changing these things. You shouldn't be introducing more rules to deal with these things. And we don't need to keep changing everything around it because it's harder for me to learn, right? Then the problems that are presented in the game aren't being fixed. And your enjoyment in the game also isn't being changed, right? And while you may say, I'm enjoying this game at a core level, right? I just like because I have my painted models. You're actually not. And your games you're playing, you're becoming frustrated during your games. A lot of the rhetoric becomes, I want a game that works, right? But I want a game that I don't have to commit to. And I want a game that's not complicated, right? But I want a game that gives me options to deal with my opponents what they're always doing. And I also want a game that isn't defined by competitive play. It wants to be defined by just being fun, just playing a table, kind of like the way Commander is defined that way. But I also want things to be good, powerful, and exciting when compared to other things in the game, which require kind of
a balance.
And I mean, say like a kind of a rumination of how the mechanics work of the game and how everything in the game kind of operates, which comes to that balance argument. And competitive players, right, in Warhammer, one thing and one thing only, right? I want this game to work. And as long as the game works, I will find my fun in it, right? And much like a Magic the Gathering player in a format like a Modern or Legacy, I want this format to work. And as long as things in this format are balanced around a way that makes me feel like what I'm doing is impactful and my decision making is key and there's that skill-based matchup, as long as that's happening, I'm happy and I'm having a good game. And what happens is when decisions are made around a game being balanced, the casual players benefit, right? The casual players benefit because the game is becoming easier to access and understand from the perspective of I can make decisions in a game and they have impact compared to I can buy models and they're good. Because as you know, if a lot of the casual thing is like, you don't want people to just be able to spend money and beat you. That always sucks. And I think Commander, there's a conversation to be had about that too. But you don't want that. You want that to feel like your decision matter. But that means they need to do those things. And when they ask, and this is the important point I'm going to get to, I'm rolling on my words a bit, but the point I'm going to get to, when they ask questions as a developer and say, what, as the players, as the community, what information do you have? What can you offer us to help us build this better? Are they going to ask the players that as a cohort, play each of them once a month and play after a 9 to 5 for a couple of hours with their mates over a couple of beers? Or are they going to ask the players that play 6 times a week at a minimum, drinking plenty of water, going to events, interacting with communities, and like ripping apart the game at like a fiber level, like each fiber of the game? Who are they going to interact with? Who are they going to find the information from? And these people have already very different mindsets on the game. And I think that one of these sides benefits everyone. One of these sides makes the game better for all. And then one of these sides makes the game better for one, right? Because it's like, just make my stuff better. Just make my stuff good. Just make me enjoy the game from my perspective as well. Whereas at least a competitive angle is what is objectively better for the game. I know all the things, right? And I'm not saying that people can't have biases, but if I have an objective viewpoint, and this is not to say that you don't have an objective viewpoint at all, but I think this kind of experience in Magic and this more objective viewpoint, understanding all these pieces of information, translating that to how we feel about the game, that feels like it has a greater impact on what I think most people would enjoy or benefit from because it's more comprehensive. Does that kind of make sense what I'm saying?
It does. And especially when we're having this conversation about Magic, it comes, or let's keep it in the 40K realm, right? Because I'm someone who does not particularly enjoy 40K. I've tried with miniatures games and I've found that miniatures games where I have to, we talked about this last week, miniature games where I have to measure, I find frustrating because like I'm not very dexterous. I find that really frustrating. And the result that I found is skirmish miniatures games on grids are the part of the game that I like, right? So I don't go into these games looking for, I kind of expect them to work at a high level, and then I want to play whatever someone tells me is fun to play, right? So if we take that back to the Magic the Gathering conversation, I'm trying to play an entirely different Commander game to what you guys are trying to play, right? I don't want to play a game in which I've got to outplay my opponents because I work out, oh, they're in blue, they've got X mana up, that means Psych Rift is possible on this turn. I want to play the game where I draw a big dinosaur and I go, oh, sick, and I put down the big dinosaur.
And I think that's not invalid. I think that's totally like a good way to look at it. That's just like a straight up, I have a goal and I want to do it, and that's fine. And that's engaging. I think that's a great way of playing the game, by the way. Let's talk about this now. Let's get into this kind of archetype of player.
Yep.
That reminds me of a Timmy player, right? And we talk about this a lot in Magic the Gathering, where there are these 5 different archetypes of player. Connor's going to pick these up now, where this Timmy player is this player that says...
Before we keep going through, let's just go through the play types.
Okay, so you want to go ahead?
Yeah. I'm going off the top there. Well, there's what do they break it down to? Aesthetic and play. So the aesthetic, you've got Vorthos, which are the players that really care about the story behind Magic the Gathering. This is exclusive to Magic the Gathering. This is part of their profiles that they've built up over, I think, 15 years is when they really started doing the profiling.
They're basically more generalizable terms, but these are designed with Magic in mind.
Well, I'd also like to get into that as we move forward, because I think generalizing some of these terms is actually kind of toxic as well, a little bit dangerous to do.
And that's one thing that I believe Mark Rosewater has brought up on his blog on Tumblr a couple of times, with that, like, they used to use the 3-player archetype structure along their design paths, and now they have these 5-player types, these player archetypes that are in the back of their mind, but they're no longer a guide. They're just like a really, really generalized funnel. It's no longer about, well, you are a Timmy and you are a Spike.
There's a lot of overlap.
There's overlap. Some players, like, you are both a Vorthos and a Spike because you love the lore and you make your decisions based on lore. It's lost me now, probably because I'm a recorder again. But I remember there was a deck that you made that was purely just because of the...
Yeah, like currently I'm actually playing a deck, Vorinclex Monstrous Raider, right? Because my favorite thing, just for those who don't know at home, humor most of this, but in the plane of New Phyrexia, which was once Argent and once Mirrodin, there is a layer called the Tangle, right? And it became what was called the Hunter's Maze when Phyrexians kind of took hold of it. And it's a very cool dynamic. I love the idea of the Hunter's Maze, and I think it is, in a twisted way, almost the most Phyrexian you can be, the most viciously Phyrexian you can be, is to be a member of the Hunter's Maze. The kind of idea that the oil does its work, and those at the top of the food chain are the oil doing its best work. And if you can't fight the biggest thing, if you can't interact with the strongest monster, you're not worthy to be Phyrexian. I just love that dynamic. So I've got a deck, which is Vorinclex Monstrous Raider, his version from Kaldheim. I've got that with the Phyrexian text. And then I play every version of Vorinclex in the deck. All my lands are Phyrexian lands, and I play only Phyrexian Tangle and Hunter's Maze like cards. And even to the point where I play a card called Tangle Hulk, which is a common, is a 5-mana 5/3 that for 2 mana can regenerate. It's horrible.
Bad.
It's horrible. Yeah. But it has this beautiful text from Vorinclex talking about how it is it's infallible, like the Phyrexian cause is, and it makes all the like patterns of a good creature. And he mentions that when something else eventually brings it down, it will have like truly proven itself, and it will learn from this creature and gain this like resilience. And that's kind of that Vorthosy nature coming through. Like, I read every story. I love the lore of my games. Any game I kind of play, I kind of get involved with the lore with. I don't think that's actually very true with Warhammer, only because maybe it's a bit ironic in the context.
I think you're in with Age of Sigmar, not so much with 40k.
Definitely. I think with 40k, I kind of hit a line of like, it's a little fascist, if that makes sense.
There's also the problem with that 40k its lore has existed for quite some time now, whereas Age of Sigmar has actually hit reset on it like 10 years ago.
Correct. And I don't really like Warhammer Fantasy. Like, I think that's fine. I think it's a little bit more interesting than 40k, but 40k for me is just very problematic. And I think that's Age actually proves kind of where the company has grown from. And there's some cool stuff within it. I don't want to like read The Infinite and the Divine if you haven't at home. That's a great book about 2 Necron overlords. But for me, Warhammer 40k doesn't do it for me. However, especially in Magic. Back to that, very character drama focused, almost feels kind of Star Warsy, where the characters are so important and the rest of the world wraps around that. So for me, I built this deck I play, by the way, just for those at home, this deck is full of cards that have the keyword toxic and the keyword infect, which from the perspective of a casual commander player is the antithesis of fun.
Bit yucky.
It's a bit yucky. It's
it's
definitely
almost
Spike
yucky.
territory.
It's definitely, well, people would argue it's very Spike territory, but I could speak to a lot of Spikes who would tell me not only does this deck suck, but if I brought this deck and built it up and played far more competitive versions of cards I'm already playing, it would still suck.
Yeah.
Because Infect is a yucky mechanic that's a very stressful mechanic, but it's actually not as powerful as some, I would say, biased perspectives would tend to project that it is.
Yeah.
Right? It's yucky because it focuses down a person and kills them. And it's not necessarily a cool thing to say, hey, you're going to sit here for 2 hours while you finish a game.
Yeah.
It's more feels bad than it is oppressive.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that comes back to that kind of idea of, I think, Timmy, where we talk about a Timmy player being someone who loves those big kind of fun, explosive plays and also cares a lot about feels bads. But
So we've got, the Vorthos and the Mel. Mel is just about the art, right?
no, actually. I think it's actually mostly, Mel is all about how the game's mechanics operate.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
It's like if a magic mechanic comes out in 2023 and I learn about like Discover, and there was like a mechanic that's like from 2009, right? The people who developed this, the entirely different team of people, like these mechanics are going to interact in some way, right? Like if I discover into a card with Cascade, I can Cascade off it, right? And Discover as a new mechanic as well cares when a creature enters the battlefield. So I'm able to do things like double the enter the battlefield trigger with a card and then get 2 Discovers, then 2 Cascades, all with cards that were released in 2023, 2013, 2009, who'd had no idea what would look like in the future. And yet the game just works this way. So if I can do the click, 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 and the game's mechanics just warp perfectly to make it work, I could be wrong, but I think that's a Mel player. That's kind of what it goes about. It's like the story is the story. I think it says in the article here that the story comes second. I think
mechanics are number one.
But I think Mel is the story is like last.
Yeah.
I think Mel is like aesthetically, it's mostly how modular as a rule set is Magic.
Yeah. And so then we got the three those are the 2 newest ones. The 3 major player types that they built, like they actually built design docs off back in the day, were Spikes, which are essentially your tournament grinders, your ultra competitive players that care about optimal plays, optimal cards, the best things that they can do in a game, and how to always be better. So you would put them into competitive to hyper competitive if you used your structure of hyper casual, casual, competitive, hyper competitive. Spikes would sit anywhere competitive plus.
Yeah.
Because they're about their fun and enjoyment is from winning the game.
And also we come back to that what Lachie doesn't care about, which is that outmaneuvering. Thank you. Outmaneuvering and outplaying you. That's also important to a Spike player. It's like winning doesn't just come from playing; it comes from playing better than you.
Can I clarify that a little bit? Because I think what you said there in that I don't care about it. I don't care about it in Magic because I feel that with the amount of games I play, if that's something that I want to care about, I have better options.
So I mean to say, to rephrase that, I mean to say in Commander.
Yes.
You don't care about this in Commander. This is like the last thing you're thinking about in Commander.
Yeah.
When it comes to other games, that's important. Yeah, I think that's definitely valid.
So the next one down, I believe, is Johnny, which is Johnny. No, Timmy is the casual player.
Timmy is
I want to play really cool big things.
I want to play my dinosaur and it goes roar and it's a 6/6 with trample. It's cool.
Yeah, they have fun playing the game.
Yes.
It's not necessarily winning, but just by, resolving cards, putting down big things. And then your Johnny is your combo player, which is about getting cards that work together into a play. So I guess you're kind of like sub-Spike, kind of a Mel as well, where you're looking at mechanics and cards, how they work together, and what can I do to play. The difference between a Spike and a Johnny is a Johnny will play a 7-card combo that costs 32 mana because I can.
And the goal there wasn't, because again, the Johnny isn't also, they're like a Timmy in the sense they're not about winning, but it's about doing the 7-card combo.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what if I do...
Game actions.
What if I take 7 game actions and that untaps the first card I did in the game action, and now I can do it again?
Yeah.
Like, this might be like, I'm tapping my horseshoe crab.
They're the ones that
which
make
lets me-
they're the ones that make the farms on Minecraft.
Exactly. It's like, I can tap my horseshoe, like the redstone miners, yeah. I can tap my horseshoe crab with Cryptolithrite, and my horseshoe crab can now untap itself, which I could do over and over again.
Yeah.
I can take as many games as I want.
And then I'll find this little card, these 3 obscure cards now that also trigger off untapping things.
Exactly. And they may not win the game, and they may not translate to guaranteed winning, but that's really cool. Look what I can do and show off. I put these pieces together.
And then
I came up with this.
And then you have Crab Rave Party.
Yeah, exactly. Even without any other interaction. You can play like Mesmerical, which says every time you untap, you put the top card of your library to the graveyard, and you take your whole library and throw it in the graveyard and say, now I can play every card from my graveyard with a Yawgmoth's Will or like a Past in Flames. But doesn't matter. Like, that's cool. If you do that, that's fine.
So, and I think that's all 5.
Yeah, so it's just to run it back, it's Mel, Vorthos, Timmy, Johnny, Spike.
Yes.
They're like the 5 kind of players you find in Magic. And I want to come back to this idea of these 2 aesthetic types, which is why this is an interesting list in the first place, is that, and why they're so new, is that they are really designed, again, 15 years is really all of these things, but in the last like 8 or 9 years has been like the Vorthos, and within the last 5 has been the Mel.
And that'll be because of Commander.
And I was actually going to get into that. That is surely because of Commander and what kind of player Commander actually is trying to draw into the game, right? And what kind of player they are selling to. Because again, it's making money. And
I guess what you're saying there, is that those kinds of players have always existed in the world, but not necessarily within the player base of Magic the Gathering.
Exactly.
Because the formats that existed weren't really able to cater to them consistently.
Well, the formats that were promoted.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. And the product that was being made, again, did, and that comes back to this 1v1 versus the social multiplayer, which I think is just like a huge step in a different direction in the first place when, again, you can even play the most optimal play you want, but it's not going to change the fact that you just don't have enough resources to engage with 3 players at any given time more often than not.
That also comes down to just general board game design. So history lesson, I used to publish board games. There was only a few, it wasn't big. But in that process, I was essentially like a product designer for board games. So I would take what someone has designed and I would develop it into something that's an actual product that can be sold. So a lot of that involved adjusting rules, changing what components are and how they work, all that kind of stuff. And kind of refining a game down from whatever this big mess was into what's the core like loop and the product that we can have. And a lot of times, when discussing game design, someone would always ask, "Oh, what about this? I've got this co-op game I'm working on." And I was like, "How long have you been working on it?" Like, "Oh, like 2 or 3 years." I'm like, "Cool, you're going to be spending another 4 or 5 years on it." Because the number one rule when it comes to game design, if you haven't designed games before or you haven't like actually pushed something through to a product line, it is incredibly hard to design a cooperative game, because at that point you are now solely responsible for the balance of that game. Because it's your players versus the game, and you are the one that designs the game.
And you are playing against every player who will ever pick
play
up
the game. Yeah, in a competitive game, a multiplayer competitive game, the game always has this element of balancing itself. Are there more beneficial plays, more optimal lines? Absolutely. Is someone rocking up with a Mana Crypt and a Basalt Monolith that they can then like get an extra mana out of through some like other means? Absolutely. It's annoying, but everyone has access to that. And like you said, the resources of 3 players is very, I'm not saying it's insurmountable, but it's very hard to get ahead of.
Well, can I jump in with that insurmountable point? I think it actually is insurmountable. And what it takes is what you're constructing to be at a level so far beyond what you're engaging with. And that's this layer of like, what is the game about and who is the game for? Because I was going to, sorry if I'm jumping in, but I was going to mention about what you said earlier about, actually, I think it's building on what I said earlier about the kind of player that Magic's going towards. I think that Commander, right, wants or almost needs your archetype of player. Now, I don't know, outside of just saying the easy, you're a Timmy, classic Timmy bullshit, you know what I mean? Outside of that, right? Because, and this is a thing as well, it's classic
like,
Timmy
it's
bullshit.
Like star signs. Like I'm a Johnny Spike Rising.
Yeah, Spike Rising. My moon
Spike
sign.
Ascendant, thank you.
Sorry.
I'm a Gemini in the sense that I'm a Vorthos Johnny. Anyway, so I think that it's actually interesting because I don't actually feel like it's actually correct to even call you a Timmy because I don't think the kind of just big cards is actually just what you're interested in, right? It's like, emptying your hand and saying, I'm out of resources, deal with it, is a funny game. And I think that's something that you're looking for as well. And you mentioned that as well. I think that's a bit of Timmy-centric thing. But a Johnny player can also just dump their hand on a big combo and say, answer it. A Spike player can just go, okay, I need to resolve this 5-drop Sarah Angel in the sealed, in the cube I'm playing. I'm going to be out of mana, but it's good in the next 3 turns forward, so I will go out of mana, and if they interact with it, so what? That same argument shows up for almost every type player. The Vorthos player is like, but Sahelia is Swatley's girlfriend, so I have to cast her, even if somebody responds to it. Like, every type of player is going to fall into that. I think that there's almost this argument to be made where the aesthetic archetypes, at least in Magic's Commander, are the only ones that feel like they have a real uniqueness and impact to them. Like, no Johnny, Timmy, or Spike, if they're in that space, are really going to care who Vorinclex is, as long as they just know what he does. Because Timmy needs to know that he's a 6/6 treble haste. Spike needs to know that he's engaging with some of the most powerful, like, infect and like energy mechanics out there. But a Johnny player needs to know, like, how many charge cows does this put on my Darksteel reactor? So, you know,
are they going to double when he enters?
Well, that's what I'm saying, right? Like, how many does he give them? So nobody's going to care who he is, though, right? Whereas Timmy, Johnny, and Spike are going to care about all those things, because then Spike is also going to go, he's a 6/6 treble haste, so is Johnny. Do I need him untapped or not? And then the Mel argument of, like, the mechanics of him is also, I think that's probably almost that's the closest I see with you, where it's like the only thing that Magic offers you that other games don't. And this may not even be something that I necessarily think you want, and you jump in and like kind of build more upon this, but it's almost like what the game offers you is simply its convolution.
Yes, 100%.
And then it's like...
It's those 28,000
It's the 28,000 cards, and it's like, you know, because, okay, a little bit of information here as well. So you went to a party recently with a person that we know. I know.
Yes.
And this whole conversation started because they're a friend of mine, no names, a friend of mine. They spoke to me about it, and they were like, man, this guy has no idea how to play Magic, man. This guy's going to ruin Commander for people he plays. Like, this guy's like, well, what is Lachlan talking about? And then he quoted something from you, which, correct me if he may have misspoke, but he said that you found that Goreclaw deck too complex.
Yes, 100%.
Right? But that's like the ultimate Timmy deck. It's like...
Yeah, but it's not, because it does things other than putting creatures on the board and turning them sideways.
But does it?
Yeah.
Because every single thing you did translated to simply putting a creature on, turning it sideways. The most important thing the deck even did was make a 120 and swing sideways with it. All of the resolution of every single part of that deck, that isn't the... And it's hard to say drawing cards and tapping mana aren't making big creatures, because you have to do that in the game. You have to draw cards, you have to tap mana.
Mechanic.
That's a core mechanic. It's hard to say that's not making creatures, right? From my perspective, and this is a perspective thing, my perspective, it is the ultimate Timmy deck, my Goreclaw Mono Green Stompy deck. I can't think of a deck that I would want to play less if I was looking at a interactive game like a Spike and a back and forth, or if I was looking for a huge combo piece, huge line of play thing. And I think, you know, some plays will just take a long time because you have a lot of resources because you're not interacted with. That's something that happens. And I think that's what that example of that play was. I'm not saying that you're basing your opinion off one play, but I think it's interesting, not wrong, that the Goreclaw deck was too complex. But I also think to myself, like, but was it too complex because of the necessity to go empty my hand, play as much as I can? Did that add so much convolution to the board state and to your game actions that you went, this is actually a lot for me and I feel stressed out by doing it?
I think that, and I'm not 100% sure that this is correct, but let's look at a different deck to look at the way I think of complexity in a Magic the Gathering deck. Right? And that is, how many different things am I being told to do? Right? So last week we played with my Will deck. I love this deck.
Yeah, Will Blade of Frontiers.
Yeah, Will Blade of Frontiers, and there's a counter spell that sits in the deck box with that deck that is not in there. Right? And there's 2 reasons it's not in there. 1, I don't like countering other people's spells. It makes me feel bad because I'm making them play less Magic the Gathering. But more importantly, 2, Counterspell...
We're coming back to that.
We're coming back to that. 2, Counterspell does not roll dice. Nowhere on Counterspell does it say roll a die.
This card that we're talking about is the card Counterspell. Just so I clear.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah, the 2 blue mana Counterspell instant counter target spell.
Yeah.
Doesn't tell you to roll a die on it, so it doesn't go in that deck. There's 2 kinds of cards that go in that deck. 1 results in you rolling dice, and the other one is land, so that I can pay for the cards that allow me to roll dice. That's how that deck functions, because I think it's fun to roll dice. And any other card is unnecessary and antithetical to the nature of that deck.
But I don't think that a deck where
Dylan's cacking himself laughing at that idea.
It's so out there.
Yeah. Well, it's okay.
I also love it. I'm laughing because I love it, and I'm laughing because it's like because I know you, Lachie, and it's just so quintessential Lachlan.
Yeah.
Of like,
okay. But if
I'm not rolling dice, I'm playing land. If I'm not playing land or rolling dice, I'm not playing this game.
What's the point of running the deck if the card is not rolling dice or giving me the resources to roll dice?
Exactly. And this is the thing, right? Let's talk about two things here. The first one is that, from my perspective, Will is a very low to the ground commander. You want to benefit from his ability. You want him to get lots of counters. If the cards that roll you dice aren't just garbage, which I doubt they are, it's fine. That's totally valid. That's a good thing. That's how you want to play it.
To be clear, I play some garbage in that deck.
Sure, I saw it in our game. But
we all did.
You played cards. Anyway.
That card's so good. Everyone should run it.
Bucknard's Everfull Purse is just... Anyway, that's the point.
That was so much fun.
It should be in every game of Commander.
Oh, okay. Speaking of convolution, but okay.
Coveted jewel.
That's a bit different. That draws you a card because nobody else plays it.
Exactly.
Anyway. So I think, from my perspective, right, I think that's absolutely also valid and correct. I can't even knock that. I think that there's... Come back to the counterspell thing in a second, but I think that's good. I think that to say though that but all my cards roll dice is deceitful, right? Because while yes, there are some garbage cards in there that the benefit is put a 1/1 counter on Will because they rolled a dice, right? And maybe they do something cool because I may have gotten the initiative because the whole point is that he does give you the higher result, which is often better, sometimes worse, but often better. Or sometimes doesn't do anything, but often better. Every single card that rolls dice has different outcomes. And each of those cards has multiple outcomes based on the dice roll, which means it's hard to even work out how valuable any card you play is, because how do I know what you're going to roll on? That's engaging and interesting and cool. But it's not convoluted. It's not complex.
No, it's massively convoluted.
It's massively convoluted.
Well,
but do you see now the point I'm making? Do you see what I'm saying right here? Isn't that its own form of, in a way, even harder to interpret convolution?
Oh, it's much harder to interpret convolution.
I would argue. I would argue that it is less convoluted than most spells and magic because you don't. I mean, sure, you know what's going to happen depending on what you roll, right? But the reality is that spell doesn't do shit until you know the result of the dice. So, I mean, I guess you're letting Jesus take the wheel.
Sure, but you're
rolling the dice.
Part of why I like the deck so much.
I need to read.
Part of why I like the deck so much is it is really, really difficult to choose which card to play on any given turn.
Yeah, it is, and it's also very hard to justify which cards to interact with in a given turn. Let's take a step back to what you just said. That's just a whole different point. You said two completely different things.
What I'm saying, you're saying it's convoluted because you have all these possible options to assess a card by. And my point is, well, you don't really know what you need to assess by until you roll the dice. So it really is just
and
Jesus take
assess
the wheel.
it on the stack.
But that's exactly how I play this deck, right?
Sure, but you have two different cards in your hand, and they each cost 3 mana, and you have to play one, right? So how
Jesus take the wheel, baby.
Sure, but either one you play as Jesus take the wheel, right?
Yeah.
And
Trent, the whole point of this deck is that if I can't decide, there's a stack of D6s right there that I can roll to make the decision for me.
Sure, but the decision...
But he doesn't get a 1/1 counter on it.
Okay, but that doesn't change what's happening in the game, people. Let's talk about a card that, let's talk about a card that, deals damage based on the number that you roll. And let's talk about a card that says, draw you 2 cards if you roll the high enough number, and maybe it untaps 2 lands if you roll a greater number, like a nat 20 or something, right? You're going to need card advantage. You're also going to need a killer thing. But if you need a killer thing right now, you can just play a card that doesn't do anything, and then you didn't kill anything, and then you... Yeah. And that's not... Okay.
That's Chaos Warp, baby.
That's Chaos Warp. Sure, that's chaosy, but that's still, when you're playing those cards out, unless, and this is, again, it's like a mindset thing. Unless your mindset is just but if I, and you've made this decision already, and I understand this, but if I play every card in my hand, they all do nothing, and I pass every turn, I've already taken that into consideration when building this deck. Yep. I've decided these cards could all do nothing, and I could just do nothing all game. And if you're okay with doing nothing all game, that's fine. But when you want things to happen in the game and you want things to resolve, playing all the cards that say they might do random nonsense and help out in no way or even a greater way, or sometimes in a way that doesn't actually help as much and goes in a different direction and gives you new avenues. Say you've got like, I need to remove this 3/3 because I'm not going to get the 5. You get the 5, you're like, oh, but now I need to remove this. Oh, but I need to remove this. You're just, without saying what's right and what's wrong, without saying what's good and what's bad, this is a highly convoluted way of playing the game.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And you're talking about a deck that you borrowed of mine, which was play creature, draw card, play land, make creature, draw card, play land, play creature, draw card. Like, you talk about a deck that does the same loop a lot, right?
Because the amount of mental capacity that I want to dedicate to a game changes depending on the game. And with Magic the Gathering, I find that Magic the Gathering is a game that I play when I want to talk to friends. Therefore, I shouldn't have to think too hard about it.
But if you're just casting a creature that costs 6 mana for 4 and you draw a card and you pass, then it's not, you can talk to your friends. It's not convoluted.
Sure, but if I play the card that rolls a die and that die will tell me what the card does, then I don't have to think about why I'm casting the card. I just cast the card.
But the card has big power.
Yeah.
And that's, let's say back in the other example, that's going to deal damage to your opponent. You don't need to ask why. You just need to cast the card.
Okay, but when I played this Goreclaw deck, it allowed me to draw literally my entire deck. How
Now,
many
that's an
options
interesting
did I have off
situation.
that?
Yeah.
That's an interesting situation, because this is where I talk about this idea where I said to you, hey, you know, here's what I would say to a normal, that's a weird word, sorry, no insult. This is what I say to an enfranchised Magic the Gathering player. Hey, you don't need to overextend here. Let's take the breaks here and let's just like leave it here, because you can play the rest of your deck on a later turn, which is why I said to you, from the habit of talking to a franchise Magic players, what I could have said to you was, yo, this is a lot. Let's just stop here, because you're going to keep going and realize how many cards you can play, because you're a smart man. You did all that right. You just knew what to do in that situation, even though it was complex. And that's not what I'm trying to imply either. I'm not saying that you can't do it.
But this comes back to the player archetype conversation, right? Because if you had said to me, hey, Lachlan, if you keep going that combo, your turn's going to take 20 minutes, I would have stopped right then.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying, right? I think the discussion I had with you was the wrong discussion to have, because I habitually spoke to you like an enfranchised Magic player, not like Lachlan, and spoke to you in that way. But that, I think, was actually my point. My point wasn't that you should do things more efficiently. It was that efficiency is not optimization. And 20 minutes later is going to be so inefficient for everyone. And you're going to find less enjoyment in this because it's going to get convoluted.
Yep.
Because here's the thing, right? If you go, I play, I'm going to tell you what the card does. I don't know what it's called because I don't play dice rolling decks, but 7 mana, 5 and 2 red card. This is I roll 2d12. 1 gets me that many treasures. 1 deals that much damage to each opponent and each creature they control, right? Cool. I'm going to play this card. I'm going to make 12 treasures. I attack you with Ancient Silver Dragon. I draw 16 cards. I make no max hand size the rest of the game. I play this card. I draw 2 cards. I untap 3 lands. And I keep playing cards, and I will get more counters, and I keep rolling double dice, and then I play my fairy that gets me another dice. I roll now 3 dice for every card. I get all the high-level advantage cards. I play down the Book of Many Things. I tap the Book of Many Things. I pull the creature out of your graveyard. Cool, that's a Silverback Elder. Cool, it gains me some life. Like, your deck is able to, in a good situation, much like my Goreclaw deck is in a good situation, however arguably more efficient, more likely to get there, you're able to do these big things and take these really convoluted plays. It's just how often things are happening are based on an RNG in a literal sense.
Is it not? See, this is where I'm coming from, right? If I manage to pull that off in that game because the dice came up 20, so I get to do it all, that's exciting, because it's not that I managed to pull the right cards at the right time. It's not because I managed in deck building to think through this exciting combo. It's I played the card, I rolled the high number, and the high number said, you can do whatever the f you like. And I went, woo! Right? I love pulling the arm of that slot machine.
So I guess Wizard of the Coast really did bring in the joy of Dungeons and Dragons into Magic.
I agree. But in Dungeons and Dragons, right, your wizard cast haste on you earlier in the turn cycle in order to give you more activations. When you go to attack, you attack 3 times a turn as fighter. That means you're attacking 6 times. You want to make sure you use your action surge in this turn to make sure you guarantee the most damage in a fight.
Yeah, but then some of us play a dwarven cleric folk hero who believes that taxation is a form of noble punishment of the masses.
Sure, I don't disagree. But as a cleric, you're going to grade a healing word when we're all dying.
Possibly.
And
this is the
role playing game
now
discussion.
Now this stuff that you're talking about, like you're talking about the efficiency of play and all that. You're from my observation of this conversation here, I'm seeing you fall into your archetype of play not to throw negativity or negative aspersions on that either.
Of course not. Yeah.
It's like you're falling into your archetype of play. I don't want to say in detriment of, but kind of like I don't. It's hard to like find the word.
Combative.
It's
combative for sure.
It's combative for sure, but it's like I don't want to say ignorance either, because you are very like you understand what's happening, and it's not a bad. I don't feel that it's a negative thing that people fall into it. I feel that like that kind of ignorance of other archetypes is just a natural occurrence because your experience is your archetype.
I agree.
And your world is your archetype, and you feel like how you want to play the game is the right way to play the game. And I'm not saying that everyone has the right way or anyone has a wrong way to play the game. I'm trying to be very careful here and say that like this is an observation of what I'm seeing without it being a negative detriment to you or a negative detriment to Lachie and how he plays the game either.
But I hear like wheels rolling a bit. But I think that I think the point I'm trying to make in this conversation, right, is I'm trying to homogenize the experiences that these decks have, right, and try to work out where the differences lie.
I think that's exactly the problem, Trent, is I don't think that these situations, because from your perspective, they are really similar, right? You end up playing a lot of cards and doing a lot of things because you have a lot of triggers that result in more game actions.
Because you're resolving cards in a way that you're doing the big thing.
Yes.
You're in the position where you have access to the big thing, which you rarely are in.
Yeah. And this is why I would never build the Goreclaw deck that you gave me. Because the way that leads to having wide decision spaces that result in lots of game actions that trigger off each other is something that I'm not interested in building. Whereas I am interested in building the thing that rolls lots of dice, and then by coincidence, as a result, I get to do lots of game actions. I find that really exciting.
Sure.
And to jump in, that is because of your archetype and Lachie's archetype being completely different.
I agree, right? But this is what I'm trying to like work out as well, right? So I understand the archetypes are different, and I understand that where you're coming from is, the decision making, right? Like the dice take away decision making, right? Which makes the game easier for you as well and more enjoyable, right? Because when you do go off, like you said, it's because the cards just gave it to you, right?
Yep.
What I'm saying, right, is that we're not focusing on the value of the cards, right? Because like I opened with in the early conversation, my deck played a card like Gaia's Cradle in it. It had powerful cards in it. It's able to create those situations much more efficiently, much more consistently than your deck would be able to.
Yep.
Because your deck is relying on, like I said, you roll a 12, you roll a 16.
Yeah.
Big rolls. You're relying on those. And I understand that fully, right? But my point, right, and this comes back to this earlier point I made, which is that the Goreclaw deck, right, is a play-focused deck, where as a player, you need to realize where the convolution is taking over. Because your deck's convolution is so rare and relies little impact from your decision-making, when it happens, you have no choice but to commit entirely to it because you've been receiving this blessing. You've received this golden egg. So take it. Take it now because you won't get this again soon.
Yeah.
My deck offers me this consistently and efficiently. So I have to decide
When's enough?
enough. And then I go with full control. I've got some really cool stuff out. I got my cool Silverback Elder who now goes my Ramunap Excavator and I play a land from the graveyard and my Balos goes off. That's cool. I got 4 creatures. I'm going to pass the turn to you. And if I can do something pretty cool every turn, right? My game experience is good. I want to do something pretty cool as many turns as possible, right? And I think that's where I think your deck doesn't do that. Your deck does nothing a lot of the time. And your goal is not to do anything in Magic. Your goal is to talk to your friends. And I appreciate that and understand that fully. I think that's where the differences lie.
It is kind of a difference between, it's like, there's, and this is to bring it back down to, let's just talk about die rolling. There's a card that benefits when you roll the highest possible result on a die, right? If I roll a 4 on a D4, that doesn't feel like I did what I wanted to do. Whereas if I roll 100 on a D100, I'm thrilled. Whereas for you, when you're building that deck, if that's what you're going for, if you go, oh, this wants me to roll the highest result on a die, I should make sure I've got D4s in there because that's going to give me those opportunities to do it, right? Whereas I'm going, let's make sure there's some D100s in there because if that goes off, ooh, that's going to be a beauty, right? And it's this question of, how much control do you want to have over the flow of play?
I agree. I think that it's interesting that you've actually said that because, and this is this interesting kind of difference in like mindset where, but the thing that you got from the dice result was the same. So getting it on a D100 isn't, to me, more engaging because you didn't get, it doesn't give you, say it makes a treasure.
Yep.
It doesn't make you 100 treasure.
No, it makes
It
you
wouldn't make
a
you
treasure.
4 treasure.
Yep.
It'd make me a treasure. In the same way that I would already be playing D4 cards like you do, Bucknards, in your deck of will. I would already play those D4 cards. Why not also include this card that cares about me rolling the 4? I wouldn't go, because I'm playing this card that benefits from the 4, I've got to play a lot of 4s. It's, do I already play a lot of 4s because it's easy for me to play with 25% math in my brain? That's easy, like quarter math in my brain. Do I now put this card in? Which I would go, absolutely.
And I think a big part of this conversation, and I'm sorry to run over the top of you there, Dylan, I could see you're about to make a point, is that Commander as a format, to me, suggests that I should be playing the silly way. Because if I wanted to make better choices, I would play a format where better choices more consistently reward me, like Pioneer or Modern or, you know, one of those formats where if I'm looking for consistency, I can build to consistency.
Even competitive Commander.
Even CEDH, right, is a format where the idea is that how do you take this mess of 99 cards and make them consistent, right? That's the question. That's not what I want to play, right? I'm coming to, and let's talk about Vault Games here. The event that Vault Games holds is called Social Commander, and I come to the Social Commander night and I play at the casual table. I am playing a social, casual game. To me, with those words in mind, the aim of the game should not be to win. Ever. Full stop. If I am doing something with the intent of winning the game, then I'm going against the nature of coming here for a social and casual night, where I get to have conversations and meet new people.
Can you elaborate further on that? Because that's an interesting concept to me, because without a goal, without the games win con in mind, right? What are you applying to the table, right?
Just before we get to that, there's one thing I wanted to pick up on the statement before Lachie came in there, was the thing you said at the very start of your comparison about the D4s versus the D100. You said the thing that you get from those results is the same. And in a mechanical sense, you're correct. But for Lachie the player,
It's
the
not even
result
close.
of getting a 4 versus a 100 is not the same because of the game that he wants to play. There is a more enjoyment out of having that 100 result over that 4 result.
I agree, though.
So I wanted to, I wanted to loop that back around to that idea of not everything is about the optimal mechanic.
Well, I'm not saying it's optimal.
I know.
because-
I understand that. I'm just trying to.
Of course. But I'd like to add on that and say, if I roll a 100 or I roll a 4, right? Of course, that's different. And I would feel differently. I go, holy, I rolled 100. That's amazing, right? And I get my 1 treasure. This is only in the context of how this card works, not in the context how dice rolling works.
Yeah,
right?
but-
For example, there is a card that cares about getting 100 charge counters on it by rolling lots of dice, right? And when I roll a 20,
Puzzle box, great card.
puzzle box. I roll a 20 and I'm like, yes, I add my 20 counters because I rolled a big dice and it did a big thing. When I roll a 16 on an Ancient Silver Dragon, I draw 16 cards and I go, yes, Ancient Copper Dragon, 15 treasures. I go, yes, because not only did I roll a big number on the dice, that achieved something.
Okay, I'm going to jump in, and
please let me
go.
I'm doing something. But my point here isn't necessarily the card. It's that your assessment is happening at a mechanical level.
Sure.
And Lachie's assessment is happening as a mix of both. That's what I'm trying to get at. And I'm not saying that's like what I mean is like just saying, oh, you get 1 treasure, that's it. But you cannot devoid.
Dylan, my point expands on your point. Can I
That's
make
what
this
I
quick?
wanted him to do.
Okay.
All right.
Vexing Puzzle Box
Yes.
is this card that you've referenced.
Correct.
It taps for mana, Colorless mana. Also, whenever you roll a die, you add the result in charge counters to the card. And when it has 100 charge counters, you can tap it, spend 100, search your deck for an artifact.
Put it straight into the play. It's amazing.
Yeah. What's the most charge counters you think that a Vexing Puzzle Box should have on it?
The most?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. I feel like the most it should have on it is enough to activate it.
Right. You would argue that if it goes over like 119, right? Because if it was on 99 and then I roll a natural 20, like at that point you activate it.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe. I forget if it removes all the counters
It
or
does.
100.
It removes 100 counters.
100 counters. Well, then that doesn't matter to me. You can have,
Cool.
I think if I had like 600 counters on my Vexing Puzzle Box, that'd be really cool. I
Yeah.
think that'd be actually cooler than if I just had 100.
I have gotten Vexing Puzzle Box up to 1,000 counters before.
I've reached, yeah, that's a large number.
Right?
I don't want to talk about how many counters I've got on Vexing Puzzle Box before.
And can I tell you?
Don't measure your counters, lad.
I was gonna say,
but,
I was
but
like-
this is the thing. That deck has some very powerful artifacts in it that I could have searched,
Yeah.
but I didn't want to.
Well, see, I have that card in my charge counter deck, not in my dice rolling deck, because what I'll often do is I'll get a billion charge counters on it. I then like to very Johnny play here. I then like to animate it into a creature. I then sacrifice it, put its counters onto the Ozolith, animate a different charge counter artifact, and then move all the charge counters onto a new artifact.
God, that sounds like no fun at all.
See, interesting, right?
You need to watch some games of Highcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, that is what I want to do with it, right? Now, I've played artifacts in the deck with it before because that's also just very powerful, right? But I don't really play it for that reason because I find that reason to be solved for me. For me, it's like, yeah, this card's going to play an artifact from the deck because that's just what it does. Like,
See, so you don't care about playing an artifact from the deck because there's more interesting things you can do with it.
correct.
I don't care about playing an artifact from the deck because I think it's funny when number go up.
Correct, right? But the number's going up. That's what I'm saying.
Can I?
The number doesn't stop going up because you play an artifact deck. In fact, if you play an artifact from the deck that rolls dice, the number goes up. even
Doesn't that feel like
faster.
cheating to get number up?
You got to 1,000.
Yeah, because
Where did you draw the line of what is cheating? Because you must have gotten some cool interactions to get to 1,000.
No, I just rolled lots of dice.
Lots of what dice?
D20s mostly.
You rolled D20s.
Yeah, until it got to 1,000.
Until it got to 1,000.
God, that must be a
How
long
long did this take you?
It was a couple of hours. It was a social game.
Okay.
But it's definitely more than 50.
It was definitely
Yeah.
more than 50.
Statistically, more than 50.
It was pretty close to 50 because once you've got a couple of cards out that give you roll multiple dice, ignore the lowest, you roll at least 15 on every die, right?
Okay.
Statistically, right? But that's nonetheless more than 50. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, without saying, I don't like the terminology of like, oh, I hate that, or that sucks, or that's really boring. Yeah, that sucks. Right? Because
But if I had spent those counters to search my deck for an artifact that accelerates us to the end of the game, then
it doesn't need to. You could have played a Bucknards. It doesn't need to accelerate you to the end of the game. I mean, that does because somebody else wins. But it can accelerate simply the number of counters on the card. And you don't need to win with it. It's not like a Darkstar Reactor or something.
Just quickly, this loops us all the way back around to the start of this episode of you go, it funny number go up, and you go, a 3-hour game for that sucks. And that's why Rule 0 is so important.
Exactly. But here's the thing, right? It's like, and I understand because this I think was the big difference between our mindsets. What's so interesting is that I have an idea of what the means is.
Yep.
Right? And then I have an idea of what the end is, right? And I like to go, and this is without any shade of anyone involved, I like to go, the means are interesting, but the means need to be quick, and the end needs to be good. I want what I resolve to be cool. Resolving things is cool. The means to get there is how we get there. And I'll get to why. I feel that you have this kind of swap.
Yep.
Where the means to get there is your juice and your bread and butter. And then the end is like, I don't care. Because like, if somebody bombs my board, it won't matter anyway.
Yep.
And I can't control if they will. So, but for me, here's what I was trying to get to a little bit earlier. And it kind of goes into this counterspell discussion, how the game kind of works in a way. I think the means, from a perspective of someone who's played lots of Commander and interacts with, there's 3 other people at the table, that needs to be the thing, in my opinion, that we have to get past. That can't be, for me, the thing that I'm spending all my time on and really making happen. Because the longer this means takes to happen, the more game actions I'm taking, the more things I'm doing, the more elements I'm adding, the further away from gameplay my opponents are getting, the further and further away, right?
Sure. So can I ask you a question then?
Of course.
Why aren't you playing Go?
Well, I have not played Go. So there's a reason why
Sure. Okay. Chess.
I used to play a lot of chess.
Yep.
And much like the dice discussion, I like the RNG element because it introduces players unlike myself to the game.
Sure.
It introduced players like you to the game, and I don't necessarily love interacting with players who are interested in chess. I love interacting with players like yourself that are interested in the things that you're interested in.
Because here's where I come to Commander, right? The reason that I play Commander is because there can be 50 people in the store who play Commander, right? When it comes to a game of Commander, I literally do not care if we're playing Commander or we're playing Pop-O-Matic Trouble. It makes no difference to me because the point of playing that game is that there are people around who will play with me and we're sitting around a table having a chat. Because if we wanted to play a game I would enjoy, and I'm not saying that I don't enjoy playing Commander, but for me, the joy that I have found in Commander is using it as an excuse to get 3 of my friends around a table with me and have a chat.
Yeah, I agree.
If people would agree to come play Pop-O-Matic Trouble with me, then I would use that all the time. If I wanted to actually play a competitive game where I was trying to win, Magic the Gathering, Commander, whatever format you want, it would be so near the bottom of the list because I think Android Netrunner is a better game. Because I think that any of the 300 board games that I own are better games for doing that. Because Magic is so convoluted and there's so many options and so many things that can happen that I don't think it's necessarily interesting to try to win a game of Magic the Gathering because cards have to be banned because they're too good. They let you win too easily. Right?
Somewhat true. There are a lot of cards that are banned for reasons that I've actually mentioned before. There are cards that are banned not because they win you the game, but because they end the game in ways that are just not cool.
But this is the point, right?
They're too consistent.
No. There are cards that are too consistent. There are cards that are too powerful. And then there's Biorhythm. Have you heard of the card Biorhythm?
Nope.
Okay. Biorhythm is 8 mana. It is a green sorcery. Okay.
Immediately I'm in love.
This is important, okay?
You won't be.
This card says each player's life total becomes equal to the number of creatures they control, right? This is really cool, right?
It kills a lot of players on sight.
That's interesting, right? It can just kill a lot of players on sight, right? And this is Sheldon Menery was the man who came forward and decided this card needs to go, right? And a lot of people disagree. They go, this card's not even that good. It's like 8 mana. You gotta kill everyone else's creatures, then you win with it. People weren't winning with Biorhythm. What Biorhythm does is it does something that, actually, this is interesting, because there's another quote I think I have from you that, correct me if I'm wrong, but let's talk about this. The best win state in a game, this is a quote from you, from what I've heard. The best win state of Magic, let's say not best, but maybe my favorite win state of Magic would be that we've all decided the game is over, we've had enough of playing, and we just pack it up.
100%.
Right? It is utopian. It is almost borderline impossible for all 4 players to agree on that end state. That end state is so subjective, it is impossible to agree on. Unless, of course, you don't have to agree. Unless, of course, somebody goes, Wrath of God, destroy all creatures, Biorhythm. Why? Because they don't have many cards in their hand. They don't have a lot of ways to draw cards. They don't really have a way to win the game. Lachlan over there, or let's say in this situation, Trent over here, has been playing lots of cards all game, and he's so far ahead, and I can't really beat him here. He doesn't have any creatures. And if I blow up these guys' creatures, and I don't have any creatures, then the game just ends. We can all just start again. You're Wrath of God, Biorhythm. Right?
Interesting that card is banned, but Worldfire got unbanned.
Because Worldfire doesn't end the game.
True.
What this card does is it literally says one person has decided that the game is over for them. Now the game is over for everyone. And an important
and that's
point.
Crap.
I agree. But importantly, why Biorhythm is banned? Nothing to do with its power level. And why Worldfire isn't banned? Because it's got a very high power level. But it doesn't win anyone the game, and it doesn't lose everyone the game. It just creates like a whatever board state. And the game, even with a ban list, by the way, Lachlan, this is really important. Even with a ban list and certain cards not being banned on it, the game has this multiplayer social self-solving situation. You play on the casual table, you play at a social event because you don't want someone to play certain cards in their deck. You, without any putting too many words in your mouth, you have, in a convoluted way as well, not exactly you have soft banned thousands of cards that are possibly played in the game. Because these aren't the kind of cards or the kind of gameplay you're looking for. In fact, you've already banned from yourself counter spells. right? Which, for reference, have this greater picture identity to them, where sure, you might feel bad somebody because they might play a powerful card and you might counterspell it, and that doesn't feel so good, right? But I'm sure, right, 2 other players in your 4-player pod really appreciated it. Because 2 other players in your pod then don't just lose to this powerful card that somebody pops off, and they get to keep playing the game. And yes, they can always re-rack, they can always restart, start again, but they've been building this cool playout. They might have something cool to play.
And I'll say that that's something you mentioned to me recently that actually really turned me around on board wipes and counterspells, right? Until, I think, literally 2 weeks ago when you made this point to me in a message, I was like, oh, now I get counterspells and board wipes.
Yeah,
that was the point that made me understand. But this comes from the sense, and again, like, we don't really want to open my box of hot takes because I was about to say that Sol Ring and Black Lotus should either both be banned or both be unbanned. There's no reason for one to be banned and one to not be banned.
You know what? That's not very controversial.
That's
In
not
fact,
as controversial.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Right? But it comes down to the idea of like banning cards because of power level means that there's end states to this game that are undesirable because the game ends too quickly. Right?
I think that is...
Or the game ends in an unfun way.
Or I think it's more complex than that. It's more comprehensive than that. But I think it's to continue your point, not to interrupt you too far. Yeah. I think that's fine to say. I do think it's like that almost needs an asterisk because I don't think quick is a problem. I think decisive is probably the best word for it. It ends the game in a very decisive way and gives people little room to interact and play their own game. And what I said is, yeah, it sounds like more words to say it ended too quickly. But it's more than that.
It is,
but
and I understand that. But
just for everyone listening as well.
It always comes back to this point where I go, why am I playing Magic the Gathering? And this is an ongoing question for me. And sorry, I should specify. Why am I playing Commander? Because the reason I'm playing Commander is it's a game that other people will play with me.
Yeah.
That's literally all it comes down to. If the people in the store were playing something else, I'd play something else because I don't enjoy Commander all that much as a game.
See, that's the interesting point I think we keep coming back to, and that is what you say, right? That's like in the choice of almost anything else, you would play anything else.
Probably.
And I just want to kind of reinforce and almost have you elaborate again further. You know, to repeat yourself, I understand, but reinforce what about Commander, from your perspective, is what pushes you away from Commander? Because I feel that Commander caters to your player the most. Your identity, what you want from the game, is what Commander as a format is catering most to. Those who want to play the beer and pretzels social environment with a lot of random stuff happening and not worrying too much about the interaction. There's a lot of cards in the game that are designed for standard and for other formats that really project like it's really comprehensive and you want to learn every single card. And there are those that are benefits for that. But as Commander decks, like look at the way Commander precons are designed. Look at the cards that come in those precons. Look at the way voting is a mechanic in that format. Look at the way that like Demonstrate exists from the Strixhaven decks. Look at the way that these mechanics are designed and go, is this not a game that's being catered for me?
Yes. And I'm so glad you made this point. If I could build all 4 decks at a table, Commander would be one of my favorite games.
And this is also useful because this is what I find as well, is what I thought you were going to say, because a lot of people don't like draft, but they build their own queue.
Yep.
Because they don't like the decisions that Wizards makes around a sealed format, but they know how to take the the pieces, there's a better word for that, the components. They take the components of the game and make their own format, right? Like, that's how I played Oathbreaker. When I played Oathbreaker, I built everyone's decks, because if you want to know a game that's like everything bad about Commander, it's Oathbreaker.
Yeah.
Oathbreaker is everything. I'm going to say it right now. Quote me on this. Oathbreaker is every... I don't know. It's like the Dark Souls 2 of Magic, okay?
Yeah.
Everything that sucks about Magic is in Oathbreaker, okay?
And the only way to get good at it is to get good
Is to get good, right? However, what you can do is much like modding stuff out of Dark Souls. What you can also do is you can just make that sealed pod, and I designed 6 Oathbreaker decks, and I went, there are so many cards I could be playing in these. There are so many extra planeswalkers I could play in my Ajani deck. I'm just not going to do that, because forget that. One player is going to play forever and just win, and there's no interaction, and it's very decisive, and who wants to do that? And then I had a lot of fun with Oathbreaker because I could control that. And there were cards where like, this card comes out after my next game because I've realized how bad it is. A good example of that is after you played my Goreclaw deck, I removed some of the elements from that deck that I went, this is actually too many game actions and this is taking too long. And again, this means to end discussion I had earlier where I say the means is my comprehension. It's like what I don't care about, but I spend most of my comprehension on because I go, we need to make this efficient and move on because who cares? All my opponents are going to care about, which is what I care about the most, all my opponents care about, why I like interacting with you so much, is that they're going to care about this. This is what they need to pay attention to, so it can't be too convoluted, but they care about this. That's all their decision making, right? So I can make a bunch of 4-power creatures. I don't need to do Kodama of the East Tree, Bounce Land, Rampaging Baloths. I don't need to do this thing where I'm making infinite lands and infinite tokens because I can just make a bunch of 4 creatures and this takes way longer. So I can't do it.
So I want to say something here, and I feel like, and I'm going to barrel down the camera as I say this, I am not against Magic players, right? This is not me versus the Magic players. Please understand that. I find that enfranchised Magic players look at the game of Magic through the lens of being a Magic player. And that is totally different from looking at Magic the Gathering through the lens of being a person who plays games. Because to this day, a game with land cards in the main deck is such a 1990s concept of the way a game should work.
Archaic.
Yeah.
It's so archaic. And there are so many simple fixes, like you need to bring 99 cards. A bunch of them go in one deck and are your lands, and all the rest go in another deck, and you choose which to draw from at the start of each of your turns.
Have you played Force of Will?
The card Force of Will? The card game Force of Will.
The game,
yes, I have.
That's how Force of Will works. You've just explained the Force of Will mana system.
Right.
Except that you tap your J ruler to do the land thing, but you know.
Or you look at Lorcana, and the way Lorcana works is, hey,
You said words there, and I was just like,
I said tap.
you look at Lorcana.
Exhaust.
Lorcana is a game where the vast majority of your cards can be played as resource cards.
unless you're playing Emerald.
Like WoW TCG was back in the day.
Like
You
WoW
could
TCG
turn
was.
anything upside down.
You look at Netrunner, where you get 3 actions a turn, and one of your actions can be gain a resource, and your resources are permanent across turns, right? And that's a simplification of Netrunner rules. Netrunner fans, I know you get 4 actions when you're the runner, don't at me. But there's so many resource systems that are so much more interesting and so much more exciting than draw a card from your deck, it might be a land, and you accelerate over the turns, right? And I find that to be such a waste of time that there's going to be games where people get screwed on land, right? And the idea that you have to build decks around getting screwed on land and build ramp into decks so that you don't have to worry about land so much means that the actual gameplay, the fun bit of... I don't feel like playing lands is the fun bit of Magic the Gathering. Do you disagree?
I agree.
Do you find it enjoyable to peel a forest off the top of your deck and slap it down?
No. I don't think playing a forest, though, is the same as playing a land. And I think that this comes back to this understanding of the game.
Hold up. The reason that playing a forest is not the same as playing a land is because the existence of the land system within Magic the Gathering has necessitated changes to the way the game works to make the play of lands more exciting.
Of course.
Right? The fact that modal double-face cards exist in the form of lands, in the form of, you know, your pathways or any of that stuff.
Well, pathways are a bad
landfall
example
mechanic.
because they're both lands.
Well, even Shatterskull, was it Shatterskull Pass?
That's a
where-
better
Right.
example.
Yeah, you can
No.
play it as like an X drop bolt
Yeah.
versus
It's like a fireball.
Yeah.
versus a lightning bolt.
Yes.
Lands.
Yeah. I think pathways are a perfect example because pathways are there to make it more difficult to play your deck if you want to play multiple colors, but not as difficult as just playing multiple different lands, right? The idea of pathways is that they accommodate for multicolor decks and make that reliance
agree.
less so.
Sure, but they're both lands.
Yes.
Like, as in, I don't think playing a pathway is more exciting than playing... Like, if I have a green-white pathway, that's not more exciting than playing a forest or a plains because when I resolve the card, it's still a forest or a plains. What's more exciting is playing a land that says... I don't know, like the common cycle coming out in the new Ixalan set that says, I can play this land as a land, which I'm going to do, and later on in the game for 5 mana and crack it, I'm going to discover 4, which gives me a cool mechanic, which is existing on, speaking of necessitating, this is coming out on more and more lands. More and more
ever
lands.
since Phyrexia.
Ever since, well, even like OG Phyrexia, you mean, or like the new one?
No,
'Cause
Phyrexia
even earlier than that.
But they're
even
putting full cycle. Oh, I mean,
even
like Arm Kent had the cycle.
man lands from the OG
I'm gonna
Zendikar.
interrupt.
Sorry.
If Magic used the Force of Will system, those lands would not be necessary.
Of course.
Yep.
But they
100%.
aren't, but That's correct. But they aren't less fun to play because they're necessary.
You're looking at this through the lens of a Magic the Gathering player.
I don't think
Right?
I don't think that's necessarily true. I am looking at this through the lens of someone who's looking further and further forward in the game of Magic and going, how soon till basic lands aren't homogenous with the play experience, right?
Look,
in Commander,
I think we're almost there.
we're almost there.
I'll be honest, like my Abzan deck, I think runs my Abzan Bilbo deck runs 7 basic lands in total,
And you
out of the full 30 something.
Yeah, and you don't see them, like you don't need to see those as the card that you play for turn, because you mentioned those ramp cards. Those cards can resolve in basics, which allow you to play
and
them as
then-
like an extra resource.
But that is a fix for the archaic design of lands.
I agree.
Yep.
But it is a fix, so it's not like it doesn't exist and we can't
Sure.
use it as information. We can't say that, oh, because it's a fix to an arcade system, it no longer is fun and it no longer exists.
But why don't you just play a game that didn't need fixing in the first place?
Because the core mechanics of this game I still enjoy, and the modular nature of this game I still enjoy. And it is also more to say that this game is so mechanically open-ended that we can have all of these things exist in the game and it still runs like a
Do
clock.
you think mechanically open-ended is a good thing?
I think that's a loaded question. I don't necessarily think it's a great thing or a good thing, but I definitely don't think it's a bad thing.
I
And
dislike it.
See, and that's interesting, and I can appreciate that. I have no opinion on whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I do know that it's one of the reasons I can consistently come back to Magic and know I will consistently have a new experience by the decisions I make when I create my decks in Commander. I can consistently create new experiences for myself because the game has a huge variety of cards in the game. Like, you know, and this is not also to say that I don't like cards that do incredibly weird things. Like, here's a great example. Have you heard of the card Seed Time?
No.
It's my favorite Magic the Gathering card. It's my favorite one. It is 1 and a green, okay? It is an instant card, but you can only play it in your own turn. You can only play it if your opponent played a blue spell in your turn. And then you take an extra turn for 2 mana. So the card is so like...
so niche.
It's so niche, but it basically said to you, it's almost like this kind of F you to counterspell decks where it's like, oh, did you stop me from playing my commander? I'll just try that again, right? As opposed to saying, I don't think that was cool and I don't get to have much fun. It was, if I don't think that's cool, I'm going to find a cool way to make that into a benefit for myself. That's why Seed Time is such a cool identity of a card for me. I know it's not like, again, you look at this as well for the lens of, but that's a fix. And I agree. But I also don't necessarily think, this is like, for me, I also look at Magic the Gathering, and this does come from the lens of a Magic player, which I can appreciate here. I look at Magic the Gathering as well, in this alone respect, as an old dog.
It is.
You know?
Yeah.
Like,
It's an old dog.
if she's been
It's
to
30 years.
She's 30 years. She's been to the vet. She's got a splint in her leg, but she's still running, and she's still smiling, and she looks like the same dog as I remembered her, right? She's got a couple of bags under her eyes, you know what I mean? And one of the eyes is blind, but she can still see.
Sure, but you've been feeding this dog every day for the past how many years? As someone
Too many.
Too many.
as someone who has fed the dog once a week for 2 years, I'm not that attached to the dog.
It's probably
I
dead
agree.
right now.
Like, if
That's not the point.
the dog's at dad's place and I live with mum, I'm not that attached to the dog.
I appreciate that, right? But you, okay. Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you not being so attached to the dog. That doesn't mean, right, that you dislike the dog.
I don't want the dog to die.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that if there was a golden retriever puppy who's going to go and catch the ball, I'd rather play with that.
Interesting. Interesting.
Because I don't need to accommodate for the fact that that dog's blind.
This is a weird analogy because it's like
It's a
living
really
creature.
horrible
Yeah,
analogy.
yeah.
It's like a living creature,
Look,
so like...
We're getting through time, so I think we should probably... I got some questions I think we can finish, round it up too, because this discussion can go for hours.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
As it already has.
And it has often for me.
Yes. So
I can't imagine
I think
why.
I'm going to finish off with 2 questions. We'll handle the first one first. We're talking about lands being an archaic mechanic. Do you think Commander format would be better served by having a 30-card land deck and a 70-card, well, a 69-card play deck?
No.
I also agree no.
I think that there are too many cards in Magic that have fixed lands for you to ban them all. or redesign them all. And I think those cards, look, I think Commander started as a format with 99 random cards, and it's all about overcoming the adversity of the dog.
Yeah.
It's overcoming the adversity of the game that's kind of a mess in this very specific design.
Well,
right?
that's the big thing that that is it. The professor said on Tolarian Community College is like the Commander only ever works as a format if we all sit down at the start and go, well, this game's just broken.
It's broken.
Let's have some fun.
It's broken. Exactly. It's broken. But we're all about overcoming the broken nature in the game however we can, as long as everyone enjoys themselves. And part of the overcoming is also overcoming the land dilemma. Okay. I know I don't want to take over all this side thing, but let me ask you a question. You may not have interacted with this, but I think you might have, especially playing with me. Have you been in a game before where an opponent has not drawn a land twice in a row, and you've said to them, just draw back up to 7?
Yes.
Yep.
And how many games have you said that?
I don't know.
Could you count them on your hands and feet?
No.
What if they gave you 2 sets of hands and feet? You couldn't count them, could you? Same. And you've only been playing for 2 years. Almost every single game I have ever played, ever, and your mileage may vary at home. Tell us, shout out in the comments if you don't like this. However, every single game, I've had that exact discussion if somebody's opened no lands. Because that's not the point.
Yeah.
If
I mean,
Can I ask, and again, I know we're extending it out. Why don't you then say, hey, before we start, pick 2 lands out, then shuffle your deck and draw 5?
I think that
I didn't even think of that.
I agree. I just think that the maths of pulling 2 lands out, revealing those lands to me, obviously, because otherwise, you're getting like, I'm not saying I don't trust you, but you want to make sure you describe your basics.
I don't
and
think you got to reveal.
Sure, but I don't know. I don't necessarily agree. I think that it's the case where it's like you're drawing. I wouldn't want my opponent to be. I would not want my opponent to get used to the idea that this is how this works. Right?
Sure, but what's the difference between that and saying draw 7?
The only difference is that we're setting a precedent that this is how we are starting every game. So if I was playing consistent Commander with you, and every time we played, I could draw 2 lands out of my deck, I'd play a lot less of them. A lot less of them.
100%.
100%.
Yeah.
But that's now we're pulling this game further away from Commander. In Commander,
Into house rules.
into house rules, we just draw 7 and you mulligan it. That's a rule that already exists. That's fine. We're building upon this rule. I think at that point, we're no longer representing that rule.
Yeah.
We're now representing a new rule. And I don't think that necessarily, I want to make this clear. I'm not saying that I don't trust you and that I can even argue, right? I can even agree with the whole, you don't need to reveal. The more I think about that rule, I think, you know what? I wouldn't ask my opponent to reveal. I would hope they did, because obviously they're also just proving to me that they didn't search crazy cards, like Gaia's Cradle and like Sarah Sanctum or whatever, or like Ancient Tomb, for example. But at the same time, I would want them to search 2 basics, because that's really the problem we're resolving. We just want them to have mana, not necessarily benefit from that. So I'd want them to just search basics. And I realized that's the only way I could be like comfortable. I wouldn't be worked up by it and upset and blame you or anything like that, or even like think that, but it is important.
And as archaic as the land system is as being part of the main deck, just do extra mulligans till you get the right lands still plays it. Well, you get enough lands to play. Still
And then the
plays
lands
into that, the chances of getting lands, because even if, I do that just draw back up to 7 thing, I'm probably not going to get the lands that give me a perfect game anyway.
Also, might I add, by the way, and nobody's goldfishing in this situation. Everyone's just getting lands, right?
Yeah.
This is another thing that's just a little bit more esoteric, right? But also fits into your social gathering thing. Before a game of Magic, I'm usually just doing something. I might be just setting up my dice or something, or like look on my phone. So I don't care how long you take to get your game set up, because I don't need to pay attention to anything. And I know Magic is a game that you shouldn't feel that you're forced to pay attention 100% of the time, but when you're setting up the board, you're paying 0% attention. In fact, I don't cut my opponent's decks. I put my hand on and go, want to see me do it again? I don't cut my opponent's decks because I just trust them anyway.
Yeah.
However, before the game starts, 0% interaction, 0% engagement. So I don't care how long you take. So you can just keep shuffling. It doesn't actually benefit us for you to search 2 lands, because the only real thing that saves us is time, because you will eventually just see a land with hand with lands in it.
Yeah.
So, but I need to save time. Again, we're here to hang out. I'm not here to push you through a game and get you home. So I think, to be most comprehensive, I don't ask my opponent to search 2 lands, because it doesn't solve anything for me. It only creates more problems. Not huge problems, not game-ending problems, but why create them if it doesn't solve a problem?
I mean, how many games have you also played where someone's like visibly stuck on 2 lands? Because, a 2-land hand is still an okay. It's a risky keep, but it's still an okay
and you're
keep.
not drawing for 4 turns lands, right? That's gameplay.
But if you're you have 2 lands and then you don't draw a single land for 4 or 5 turns after that. How many times have you been playing a game? I don't know about your mileage because again, you've only been playing very casually for the last 2 years. But how many times have you said, you just grab your opponent's deck, flick through, grab the basic, put it on top?
0.
Really?
0.
I've done that once or twice.
I've done it.
You know what I've done plenty of times? I've cast Sign in Blood and targeted them.
Oh, okay.
You know what I've done plenty of times? I've not attacked them. You know what I've done plenty of times? I'd said, hey, hit me. They're on 2 lands. Leave them alone. They've got time.
So at this point, we're just fixing a broken game. Why don't I just play a game that's not broken?
Because I think...
Because I have fun playing this broken-ass game.
You know what? And I think this comes back to your earlier point. Because the game doesn't matter. Why are we playing a game that's fixed? Why do we even care? Why are we playing the game that we love the identity of? And we want to play this game that isn't competitive. As in, the value of it is that it's so broken and we're fixing it in our own ways. Okay, this is going to sound really kind of sappy a little bit. But like, isn't the whole point of us playing anyway is we're fixing something in the first place, which is we don't hang out enough.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're already fixing something in the first place. Why not play a game that we're also just fixing and also creates more social environment levels where it's like, again, no other game you can think of that's fixed will introduce that layer to your opponent. You'll never be able to go in a game that's fixed and go, I'll let you draw 2 cards because you're just not really there. You don't just do a freaking kind thing for someone. Often. I don't speak for every game at home. But you're not just going to do a kind thing for someone because they don't have lands. But in Magic you would. You wouldn't just let someone mulligan a million times in Netrunner. But in Magic you would. Because it's not about the game. And I feel like that, again, comes back to you.
But this
right?
was actually, and the reason I asked those questions was to lead you to that point, because it was exactly the point I'm trying to make. It's not about Magic as a game. It's about Magic as an experience.
Yes.
Sure.
That's what Commander is. Commander is getting people around a table for a goofy ass time.
Yeah.
And that's why I don't like playing competitive decks. I don't like playing with winning the game as my goal. I like playing and doing goofy shit because it means that I know I'm going to have fun doing goofy shit while I talk to my friends.
Yeah.
And if their goal, if the thing that they find fun is wiping me off the table, if the thing they find fun is comboing to a win, I think it's, for my experience, I have the most fun when they have fun too. So if I start interacting with them and blowing up their shit and countering their spells, I see that as me taking away from the experience they're trying to have and taking away from the experience I'm trying to have of building up my silly board state where I end up putting 1,000 counters on this thing by rolling dice.
And this is... oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, well, I was kind of hoping to try to round out the point there, is that, like both of you have said, at the end of the day, Commander for us and for most players is about fixing the fact that we want to spend all the time with our friends. And at that same time, you get to have a game that you just get to enjoy, hang out, fling some cardboard and chat to your friends. You get to play a game where you win with the most obtuse, convoluted,
The most
combo
heinous shit.
I've ever seen in my life. And I get to put down a whole bunch of 1-3 petitioners and maybe mill someone out.
I agree. I think that's the whole point of the game is to get those people together, right? And I totally agree. I think that there's no time for it now, but there's a lot more comprehensive conversation we can have because, and this is the only thing I think in this conversation, right? And again, I could be wrong. This is just my inference. I still think there's one layer which I feel I haven't gotten through to you yet. And I feel like I haven't, to a degree I have, and you've mentioned this as well.
Is this spoiler alert for next time I'm on the pod?
I think this is spoiler, maybe. We'll see. We'll see what we do. I like to spoiler alert it. But...
Or we lose the audio for this one as well. We have a much more succinct recording next week.
episode.
I think the greatest thing to grasp onto of your point, which I think is just somewhat diluted. Just a little bit, right? Somewhat. I know.
Thanks for coming to the podcast, by the way, Lachie.
But aren't all of our points somewhat diluted?
Exactly,
we're all
but this is the
fucking
point.
insane.
Exactly.
Over
Right?
cardboard.
But here's the point that I want to... I know, it's maybe a nasty word. Sorry, everyone. But the point I'm making is I think that there's this layer of what is fun and you projecting your idea of it onto others. That's the thing I hear a lot from what you're saying. You're saying, I don't want to counter spell you and I don't want to interact with you because that's pulling away from your fun. And it goes, but that doesn't pull from that person's fun necessarily.
No.
And to add on to that, there is a much, and this is what I touched on this as well with my idea of means and ends. What is the greater experience at the table? Because from my perspective, right, my fun is one thing. And I think about that a bit, right? That's important. I want to have fun when I play my game. I think I'm already having fun if I'm with my friends, and that's obvious. However, I believe that the greater means of fun, the table having their comprehensive experience, what they want to do, all of them is so much more important than simply you, my one opponent.
Yes.
And if I'm interacting with you, then I am giving these players, I'm sacrificing to give these players more. And at the same time, and this is the thing that you'll learn about, this is what I mean, I don't have time now, defensive counter magic. Playing cards that you go, I want to make sure that I'm having my fun, and if somebody wants to stop me, I know that that's unfun. I find that unfun. I'm going to play my defensive counter magic. And in the 10%...
That's definitely more of a conversation to have, because I don't want to jump on that now, because...
We're going to be here for another
We'll
3
be
hours.
We'll be
That's
here
what
all
I'm
day.
saying.
But I also want to say that I think it's important not to project onto other people that the only way to have fun in this game is to win.
I agree. I agree. But I think that in a game that only has one, like, actual end state, that doesn't need fixing. You should think about that. That should be something.
I need
that you're-
fixing.
Yes. That is, if there's the one thing of the game Magic the Gathering that doesn't need fixing, and thank God for this, is that it actually ends, right? Yeah. And I know you don't necessarily agree, but it actually ends. And I think that when you are playing Magic in any capacity, whether it be Commander, whatever, that needs to be on your mind. You need to respect that in some way, right? And if a game ends before you get to do your fun thing that isn't end related, that sucks. And if the game ends way later and it happens like 3.5 hours in, somebody else might think that sucks. You know, there's lots of ways that ending the game can suck. If all creatures get destroyed and the game ends in a draw, that probably sucks, right? Like, and there's a card in the game that does literally say the game ends in a draw, and that's still legal. So there's arguments to be made about how the ban list even works.
I
But
may be building a deck around that card
yeah,
as we speak.
see what I mean? It's like, see, you want to talk about, let me land on that point. You want to talk about heinous shit? Building a deck around that card, right? And that comes down to different players' perspectives on what the end state of the game is. And the end state of the game, I think, without any insult, I think most players can agree on is that somebody has to win. And I know you don't agree.
Correct.
And that is why Biorhythm is banned.
That is why by the
Friendship is magic.
Friendship is magic. We can't get that secret line. So then that finishes on a final question that kind of will probably, I don't know, hopefully it doesn't trigger another hour of discussion.
Hopefully not. But you know
but
us.
my final question, because it was brought up throughout this, talking about it in here in this episode, you talked about not wanting to play counterspells. You talked about building Oathbreaker pods, right?
Interesting,
Which
those
is
things that correlated.
Those things are actually correlated because this is just purely like a broad thing. We don't need to go too deep.
All right, guys, calm down.
Please, it's long enough. I don't have to keep editing this. But what have you soft banned from your decks? Like you said, you didn't want to play. You only recently came around on counterspells because of what Trent was talking about.
That's still a discussion point.
I haven't soft banned anything from any decks, right? Because there's always the chance that those cards go back in when I decide that they're fun to play with again.
Yeah, well, no, you have soft banned them because they're not fun to play with right now.
That's like the soft banning.
That's
right?
the soft banning.
Sure, banned for now.
Well, then the answer to that is I have not soft banned anything because my knowledge of Magic the Gathering as a game, I don't feel is broad enough in order to do that, right? So like Counterspell, for instance, doesn't go in any of my decks that aren't built around countering opponent's spells. And I don't have any of those decks at the moment.
Yeah.
But they would go in those decks.
Do you feel like you would play those decks though?
Probably not, but I'm
Yeah.
not ruling it out.
Yeah, I know, but that's kind of like a thing of what I mean by soft banning. I mean these are things that you just move away from because they don't vibe with your I guess aesthetic of play, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, but
if counterspells is something that you don't enjoy, then I guess you could say
then the answer is any counterspells, any board wipes, anything that taps opponents' creatures, anything that destroys opponents' artifacts or enchantments.
things that can significantly move back.
Things
the
that
progress of the
move
game.
back opponents' progress.
That's almost like half the game, though. Like,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
but that's also a choice that you're actively making to not engage with a significant portion of the game, which is
Yeah.
overall going to limit your exposure or gaining that knowledge.
Trent built me a deck for Christmas once, and I took out the best cards because they destroyed opponents' artifacts and enchantments.
Yeah, look,
That's
and
wild.
we can go deep into this.
Let me get up mine.
So yours-
I could write an essay on this. I'm going to say 2 words: extra turns.
You banned extra turns.
Yes.
You played Expropriate the other day, my man.
I know, and I
know what? You didn't win with it either.
You know what? Exactly. And here's the point I'm going to make. Here's the point I'm going to make. It was legitimately the release of Expropriate. It was the last time I played Expropriate. The release of that card.
Yeah.
And I played it again recently, and less than an hour later, every card from that deck that said extra turn was removed. I don't play that in the deck anymore.
Oh my God.
And I could write and I will one day write an essay on this mechanic. I think the only truly toxic thing in Magic the Gathering is taking extra turns. And I know my favorite card is Seed Time. And I think that becomes a means end situation where it is.
That's hilarious if you pull it off.
Yes. And it is also a response to, I don't get a turn, now I get a turn. Not, I have had a full turn, now I get a turn.
Yeah.
And it breaks down to this. If I play a card that says I take an extra turn and everyone says we pass priority, we don't interact with it, I can be absolutely certain there'll be a full next turn where no one will interact with anything because that was the time they should have done it. And that was the time that even a most casual player would have done it.
Dylan, what have you soft banned?
It's something that toils me all the time, and I've been actively trying to avoid it. But generally, I want to say 99 times out of 100, I won't play counter spells at pre-release. I'll play counter spells in drafts. I'll play counter spells in Commander, but for some reason,
pre-release is the time for everyone to see new cards.
Yeah, that's kind of my thought process. I mean, if I played at a competitive or an experienced table where price structures were weighted based on numbers, based on results, then I probably would play counter spells.
Can I call this, what you're saying right now, a cop-out?
What do you mean?
In the sense that
what have you soft banned from your Commander decks?
Yeah, to soft ban things in a pre-release environment, I think you could. I totally agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
To soft ban thing, and just saying everyone wants to play their cards and like counter spells just going 1-for-1 and just suck is totally valid, right?
Yeah.
And I think you're going about, but I think you're answering like a whole different question. There's pre-release is kind of what's the word I'm looking for? It's philosophically so incredibly different to Commander that it almost doesn't apply to Commander because you would never stop playing.
I'm going to jump in and say that this is another conversation that we need to go towards ending the podcast. So I've got one more question to finish us off.
Sorry.
Go quick.
No, I'm not going to say anything. You answer Lachlan's question. What have you soft banned in the format we're currently talking about?
Commander. We answered the question.
Yeah, not to shit on you, but that's kind of unrelated.
I have personally soft banned a lot of fast mana. Like, part of it is that I don't have it personally, but I am in a position now where I can go out and purchase it, and I choose not to because I feel like, Mana Crypt, Dockside Extortionist, these kind of cards become such key crutches to lean on in deck building,
homogeny,
and gameplay that I don't want every game to feel the same.
Ban Sol Ring.
And we can all agree and this is the Sol Ring being banned discussion a little bit. We can all agree that spending money to win doesn't count. We can all agree that no matter how you want to win, spending money to do it feels bad.
Yeah,
no matter what, it always feels bad. So, and you were going to say one last thing.
So let's wrap up the podcast with a more fun question. Your favorite card is, what's it called?
Seed Time.
Seed Time. My favorite card, and correct me if I've gotten the name of this card incorrect, is it Kargan Intimidator?
No, I think that's correct.
Yeah.
You know this card.
Says that you make creatures into cowards and cowards can't block warriors can't be blocked by cowards.
Correct.
What a great line of text.
That's fantastic with Maskwood Nexus.
It is. I collect cowards. I collect every coward that's ever been printed in Magic the Gathering.
This is a reference to an older card. Yep. There's an older card that does this too. There's a giant.
Yes.
Boldware Intimidator.
Boldware Intimidator. That's the one.
OG version of that. So.
That's my favorite card. Yes, I got the names mixed up. Dylan, what's your favorite card in Magic the Gathering?
What is my favorite card in Magic?
Is it Aetherflux Reservoir?
It's not.
I'm just kidding.
Aetherflux Reservoir is a card that I've always wanted and never had, and now own 3 of because there's like 2 decks that it really works in, and then a third sits in the corner for when I build hardcast decks. That's hard to say. My personal favorite card for a long time was always Slimefoot the Stowaway. Like, that's the guy that really brought me really hard into Commander. he was an uncommon guy in Dominaria, so I built a brawl deck out of him, and then like every other brawl player in paper format, when rotation happened, I went, I could just add 40 more cards, and I have Commander.
That's super valid. I love that. Not to interrupt. I love that your favorite card is so different to what, like, I picked a card that I love the philosophy of. You picked a card because you love what it does, and you picked a card because it means like it has a story.
It has history.
It has history.
Yeah. And then the other side of it is, like, my other favorite card is purely just Persistent Petitioners, because it's such a dumb.
Yeah, that's like the mechanical one.
Yeah,
but I think also that like the history card is also really valid. I think and I think from the lens of a Magic player, that's kind of coming back to this idea of like, you know, we don't care that the game is broken. We don't care because we love it, and there's so much of our lives that have history around it.
Because that's the other thing. I could also say Rurik Thar the Unbowed, because that was the face card of the first deck that I ever played.
Yeah.
Right?
I could say, I mean, maybe it's not because I can't remember his name, but I could say that it's like the 6-mana Soul Shift 3 Kami. I can't even remember his name. The common.
Yeah.
That was the first
Kamigawa Mint.
Kamigawa Mint. That was the very first card that I ever owned that was a real card. It was a real card.
Zerg deck.
And you know who's a real card?
No.
Me, Lachlan Albert.
Sorry,
And you can catch me on the podcast Board of Games, BOARD of Games. You can find that at twitch.tv/Board of Games, or you can go onto Facebook or Twitter/X and find us there. You can also follow Wrestle Radio Australia, the pro wrestling podcast that I'm a part of, which we're about to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of with a live stream on the 11th of November. That's at twitch.tv/Wrestle Radio Australia, or we can be followed at Wrestle Radio AU on all of the social media, and you can follow me specifically at Lachlan Albert on Twitter and all that good stuff.
Yes, links of which will all be in the description down below.
Are you on Spotify?
I'm on Spotify.
Cool.
We should really get on Spotify.
I only been telling you that every episode.
I know, but it's so
You said that to me on camera like it was your year. It's like PAX 2024 all over again.
Yeah.
I feel like he's like a mind player, and I'm like right here, and he's like sucking it out like
Trent, I've done my wrap up. Close the
Sorry.
episode.
Yeah.
God damn it, Trent.
I'm trying to let Dylan host here and not do it myself.
Cut this out.
Wow.
All right, bye everyone. Thanks so much for staying for this massive discussion. If you have anything you want to talk about, let us know in the comments. What's your favorite Magic card, or what kind of player do you identify as? Or do you think Commander can be fixed with a 30-card land deck? Doubt it.
Wrong.
What have you soft banned?
What have you soft banned? We want to know all of that. Let us know in the comments below. We keep a track of it and we have a look at everyone. We read every comment. If you want to see more from the Vault podcast content, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and get the bell on to get notified every time a new video goes live. Doing all three of those really helps us spread the channel to more eyeballs, which means that more people get to enjoy From the Vault, get to enjoy our weird ramblings from Game Store Down Under. And also,
everyone says that at the end of the episode. I'm coming in not part of this podcast, but part of other podcasts. It helps. It really makes a difference. And when we as content creators see people do that, it really means a lot.
Yeah, I was going to add that too. I'm always in the comment section, guys. I get so giddy when I see comments. I always engage with them, even if it's just like, whether it's in the comments of the video or in the next podcast, we'll talk about stuff that people say. I just absolutely just love you guys. I really, really appreciate it. Almost like how much I appreciate Connor.
Hey,
the episode.
From the ones and twos.
Thank you so much, Connor. We always appreciate you here.
That's good. I feel appreciated. Thank you, guys.
And if you at home want to make Connor feel appreciated, more ways than one, definitely like, subscribe, and hit the bell.
yes,
Get notified.
and it's completely free for you to do.
Yes.
That's it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Trent. Thank you, Lachie.
Thank you, Dylan.
Thank you again, Connor.
Thank you, Connor.
Stay safe out there, everyone. Wash your goddamn hands. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye, citizens of the vault.
You had to do it.